Should I stop inviting my friend to group dinners after months of pretending not to notice what she's doing? The worst part wasn't that she kept ordering the most expensive thing on the menu. It was the little look of surprise every single time the bill arrived, as if money itself had personally betrayed her. I don't know if I'm overreacting, being petty, or just finally tired enough to say something out loud, but this has been building for so long that I genuinely dread what used to be my favorite part of the month. I'm in Copenhagen, and for the past 2 years I've been the person in my friend group who organizes nearly everything. Not because I appointed myself queen of calendars, but because if I don't do it, nothing happens. I'm the one who checks everyone's schedules, suggests places, makes the reservation, reminds people the day before, and usually arrives 10 minutes early so the restaurant doesn't give our table away. I don't even mind doing it most of the time. I like dinners. I like gathering people around a table and watching everyone settle into that comfortable rhythm where the first 20 minutes are updates and gossip. The next hour is honest conversation, and by dessert people start saying the things they actually meant to say all week. For a long time, those dinners were the best thing in my life. I'm 31, I work in communications for a museum, and my job sounds more glamorous than it is. Most days I'm writing event blurbs and trying to convince people on the internet that they absolutely must care about medieval silverwork. It pays fine by Copenhagen standards if you squint and don't compare salaries with people in finance or tech. My rent is high, groceries are ridiculous, and I'm at that stage of adulthood where I seem to attend either baby showers or apartment warming parties in homes I could never afford. So I budget carefully. I'm not destitute, but I do think about money. If I say yes to a nice dinner, I've usually already thought about what I'll order, what I can spend, and whether that means I'm eating rye bread and eggs for lunch the next 2 days. Most of my friends are in a similar position. We're not starving students anymore, but we're not floating above reality either. Jonas is a secondary school teacher. Clara works in publishing and is permanently one missed deadline away from becoming a woodland hermit. Mikkel, my partner, is an architect who loves beautiful chairs more than is strictly normal. Amelie is doing her medical specialization and routinely appears at dinner looking like she's been personally insulted by the healthcare system. Nikolaj works in IT and is the only one among us who never seems stressed by bills, but to his credit, he's never smug about it. And then there's Sain. Sain and I met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday in Vesterbro. She was magnetic immediately. Not in the fake, attention-seeking way some people mean when they call someone a lot, but in the way that makes a room feel brighter around them. She's funny, quick, effortlessly stylish, and she has that rare talent of making you feel seen in the first 5 minutes of meeting her. We spent most of that birthday party on the kitchen floor, drinking warm beer because the fridge had given up, talking about our mothers, bad haircuts, and the weird loneliness of your late 20s. By the end of the night, we were following each other on everything and promising to meet up properly soon. And we did. At first it was easy. Coffee, walks by the lakes, cheap wine at my flat, one memorable night where we ended up eating chips on a bench at midnight because every proper place had closed and neither of us wanted to go home yet. She became part of my life in that fast, grown-up way that still surprises me sometimes. 1 month someone is that lovely woman I met, and 6 months later you've seen them cry in a supermarket parking lot. There were always little clues that Sain and money had a strange relationship. She was constantly between invoices or waiting on a transfer or sorting out something with her bank. She freelanced in creative production, which I know can mean feast or famine, so I never judged that. Plenty of people have a regular income, but she also always had a brand new coat, expensive skincare, and the kind of boots that make a specific, confident sound on pavement. She talked about being broke while ordering €12 cocktails. She would sigh over the price of public transport and then book a spontaneous weekend in Milan because flights were basically free. The contradictions were so constant that after a while I stopped trying to understand them. The first dinner incident was small enough to ignore. There were 5 of us at a little Italian place in Noribro, one of those warm, candlelit restaurants with handwritten menus and too many bottles on the wall. Most of us ordered pasta or pizza and shared a carafe of house red. Sain ordered burrata to start, then the sea bass special, then another glass of wine when the rest of us were finishing our first, and finally affogato with a shot of amaretto because she deserved something sweet after this week. Nobody cared. She was in a good mood, telling stories, making everyone laugh. When the bill came, the waiter asked if we wanted to split it evenly or by item. Before anyone else said anything, Scene smiled and said even is easiest, right? I remember a tiny pause at the table. Not dramatic, not enough that a stranger would notice. Just that half second where several people did silent math at once. Jonas said yes, sure, so we split it evenly. Walking home, Mikkel casually mentioned that his mushroom pappardelle and one glass of wine had somehow become a 60% more expensive meal by the end of the evening. I laughed and said, it happens. And it did. Sometimes one person orders more. Next time it evens out. That's what I thought then. Except next time it was Sign again. This time it was a tapas place in Fredericksburg. We agreed beforehand to keep it easy because Clara had just had a brutal month and wanted something cheerful but not wildly expensive. We all ordered a few dishes to share and one drink each to start. Sign arrived 15 minutes late, gorgeous and breathless, apologized dramatically, and immediately flagged the waiter to ask if the Iberico platter was worth it. It was apparently because she ordered it plus the grilled prawns plus a second drink and then convinced Amelie to split dessert with her. When the bill came, same thing the waiter asked. Sign said lightly, oh God, can we just divide it? My brain is dead. Again the pause. Again everyone said yes. Again I told myself it was rude to make a big thing of it. After the third time, I started noticing a pattern. Not just that she ordered the most, but the exact performance around it. She never acknowledged the difference. Never once said, mine was a bit more, let me cover extra. Never offered to transfer later. Never even made a joke about having gone overboard. She acted as though all meals were fundamentally communal, even when they absolutely weren't. The bill would arrive and her face would take on this innocent, slightly overwhelmed expression, like a Victorian woman faced with railway timetables. She would touch the receipt with 2 fingers, laugh softly, and say something like, I cannot deal with numbers tonight, or I trust you all, just tell me what I owe, but always in a way that nudged the group toward the easiest, laziest, least confrontational option. And because we're Scandinavians and British, adjacent emotionally when it comes to confrontation, everyone kept going along with it. At first I thought maybe I was imagining intention where there was only absent-mindedness. Some people truly don't track things well. Some people are chaotic. Some people assume an even split is standard unless told otherwise. But the more it happened, the harder it was to believe it was accidental, especially because Sign was not careless in other parts of life. She noticed everything. She remembered who liked what wine. She could tell if a blouse was silk from across a room. She knew which bakery charged extra for oat milk and would absolutely bring it up. This was not a woman floating through life untouched by numbers. This was a woman who knew exactly when something benefited her. The tension built slowly because our dinners were not constant, maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. Enough time between them for irritation to cool, but not enough for the resentment to disappear. The problem with low-grade resentment is that it ferments. By the time the next dinner rolled around, I'd tell myself I was being silly, and then I'd watch her do it again and feel my whole body go hot. The first person I said anything serious to was Clara. We were at my flat on a Sunday afternoon, pretending to clean while mostly drinking coffee and moving piles of things from one chair to another. I mentioned, as casually as I could, have you ever noticed Sign always somehow orders the most when we split the bill? Clara looked up so fast I nearly laughed. Oh, thank God, she said. I thought I was becoming a terrible person. Apparently she had noticed for months but didn't want to seem mean. She reminded me of a dinner I'd forgotten, at a French bistro near the old university buildings, where Sign had ordered steak frites, oysters, a cocktail before wine, and then suggested we all just do equal parts because separate billing was such a nightmare. Clara had gone home and actually checked the online menu because it was bothering her so much. She had paid nearly double what her own meal cost. Once Clara said it out loud, something shifted in me. I think part of what made the whole thing so maddening was the possibility that I was the only one seeing it. There's a weird shame in feeling cheated by a friend over relatively small amounts of money, because it sounds stingy when you say it too plainly. If someone steals 50 euros from your wallet, everyone agrees that's wrong. If someone manipulates enough social pressure that 5 friends each quietly subsidize her scallops and sans her by 10 or 15 euros every month, suddenly you're the difficult one for noticing. After that conversation, I started paying more attention to everyone else at dinners. Jonas doing the little pressed lip nod when the bill came. Amali staring very hard at nothing. Nikolaj, who could afford it most easily, still looking faintly annoyed on principle. Mikkel squeezing my knee under the table once because he knew exactly what I was thinking, and yet no one said anything. Partly because group dynamics are fragile, and partly because Sign was still, outside of this, often lovely. That's the part that complicates everything. If she had been horrible across the board, this would have been simple. But she was the one who brought flowers when I got sick. She sent voice notes that made me laugh on bad days. She remembered my presentation at work and texted after to ask how it went. When my grandmother in Eris died, Sign showed up at my flat with cardamom buns and sat with me without forcing conversation. I cannot pretend she is some cartoon villain with a gold-plated menu in her handbag. She is generous in ways that matter emotionally and selfish in ways that matter practically. And maybe that's why it got under my skin so much. It made me feel like I wasn't allowed to be angry. The dinner that really pushed me over the edge happened in late November. It was cold enough that everyone came in pink-faced and layered in wool, and I had booked a small table at a modern Danish place that had one of those menus designed to make cabbage sound aristocratic. We were celebrating nothing in particular, which honestly is my favorite reason to gather. Life had been grim for everyone in different ways, and I wanted one good evening. Beforehand, in our group chat, I even wrote, "This place looks great but a bit pricier, so maybe just a heads up to check the menu first." Everybody reacted with the little thumbs up or heart except Sign, who sent, "I need joy and butter immediately." At dinner, most of us were careful, not miserly, just mindful. Mikkel and I shared a starter. Jonas got the chicken. Clara ordered a vegetarian plate. I got cod and one glass of white wine because I had already spent too much that week on a winter coat. Sign ordered the tasting menu. Not joking, the full tasting menu. When the waiter described it, she leaned forward like he was reciting poetry and said, "Yes, that one." Then she added the wine pairing. Nobody said anything in the moment because what are you supposed to say? "Hi, sorry. Can you not publicly choose to spend like a duchess because the rest of us will end up covering part of it?" That's not a sentence people say in a candlelit restaurant while sordu is being passed around. I spent the entire meal trying not to be irritated, which of course made me incapable of enjoying it. She kept offering people tastes of things as though sharing one spoonful of Jerusalem artichoke foam erased the fact that she was on a completely different economic planet for the evening. Halfway through, she actually laughed and said, "I know I'm being decadent, but I've had the worst month." The worst month. As if hardship justified outsourcing the cost to everyone else. When the bill came, it was obscene. Not total heart attack obscene, but enough that everyone went a bit quiet. The waiter, who I still think sensed the tension, asked very clearly, "Shall I separate by order or equally?" Sign gave that same laugh. Equal is probably simpler, unless someone is weirdly in the mood for admin. And something in me nearly snapped right there. I didn't say it, and I regret that I didn't. I wish I had calmly smiled and said, "Actually, separate would be best tonight." Instead, I froze because the whole table froze, and in that terrible shared hesitation, Jonas sighed and said, "Even is fine." So we did it. On the walk home, Mikkel was angrier than I was, which is rare because he's usually the diplomat between us. "That was outrageous," he said. "Freja, that was actually outrageous." I said, "I know. No, I mean genuinely, your meal was, what, half of what you paid. I know." And she knew. That was the part I couldn't stop hearing. She knew. I started replaying every dinner in my mind with fresh suspicion. Not just the orders, but the lead-up. Sign always seemed to forget cash. She was always between bank cards when a place was cashless and someone needed to put it on theirs first. She never chose cheap places when it was her turn to suggest somewhere. But if anyone else picked a modest restaurant, she found a way to elevate her own order inside it. Even at brunch, she managed to do it. Everyone else would get coffee and eggs, and Sign would somehow end up with fresh juice, pastries for the table that mysteriously became part of the shared total, and a side of smoked salmon, because why not, we're here. I spoke to Amelie next because she's the sort of person who can identify a problem with terrifying clarity. She was coming off a brutal hospital rotation and had all the patience of a damp matchstick. When I brought it up, she didn't even let me finish. "Yes," she said, "it's obnoxious. Why has nobody said anything?" "Because nobody wants to be the one who makes dinner weird." "But dinner is already weird." "I know," she said, "but only internally." That sentence has stayed with me because it perfectly described the situation. Outwardly, everything looked normal. Good food, wine, laughter, stories. Internally, half the table was doing reluctant math and swallowing irritation with every sip. There is something so specific and corrosive about a social ritual that appears warm on the surface, but contains a tiny repeated unfairness everyone politely accommodates. Amelie also pointed out something I hadn't fully named to myself. It wasn't only the money, it was the entitlement. If Sine had occasionally ordered more and then apologized, or even just seemed embarrassed, it would have been an annoyance. But what made it hurt was the underlying assumption that the rest of us would absorb it, that our discomfort mattered less than her convenience, that maintaining her image of herself as spontaneous and indulgent was worth a little extraction from everyone around her. And once I started seeing that attitude, I began spotting it elsewhere. Nothing huge, just patterns. She forgot her wallet on a museum day and I bought her ticket. She said she'd send it later, she didn't. Once, when we were ordering takeaway to my flat, she added extra sides and dessert to the basket after everyone had agreed on a simple order, then rounded down when transferring. If we shared a bottle of wine at mine, she'd arrive empty-handed and then talk about the natural wine shop near her place like it was a personality trait. The amounts were always just small enough to sound silly if I brought them up individually. And to be fair, I should say this, not everything with Sine was transactional. She hosted too, sometimes. She cooked occasionally, and when she did it well. But even then, there was often an asymmetry. She'd make a dramatic meal and mention 3 times how expensive the ingredients were, yet the next time we were out, she'd default right back to even splitting with no sense of irony. It was like she believed generosity counted most when it was visible and emotionally legible, but not when it required private restraint. December came, and with it all the ugly financial pressure of winter. Gifts, travel, heating bills, all of it. Our group usually does one festive dinner before everyone scatters to family obligations. I almost canceled the idea entirely because I couldn't bear another evening of seething over mulled wine. But people wanted to meet, so I booked a cozy place near the center with hearty food and a set holiday menu. Fixed price, I chose it on purpose because I thought, perhaps naively, that a set menu would solve the problem. It almost did. The base menu was the same for everyone, and I felt relieved the moment we sat down. Finally, I thought, finally a dinner where nobody can quietly turn their own choices into communal debt. Sine arrived sparkling and late, kissed both my cheeks, and told me I looked tired in a concerned way that made me want to laugh. Everyone was in good spirits. There were candles and coats piled on chairs and condensation on the windows. For the first half hour, I genuinely enjoyed myself. Then the drinks started. The menu included 1 welcome glass and coffee at the end. Anything else was extra. Most of us got 1 additional glass of wine or a beer. Sine got cocktails before the first course because she was feeling festive, then wine with dinner, then a dessert drink because Jonas made the mistake of saying the liqueur sounded nice. When the bill came, the food part was easy, but the drinks had to be added separately. The waiter asked if those should be allocated individually. I looked directly at Sine. She smiled, tilted her head, and said, "Oh, I didn't keep track. Did anyone else?" I have never been more certain that someone was acting. Even Nikolaj spoke up then, very mildly but still. "I think individual drinks make sense." And I thought, thank God, finally. But Sine gave a little theatrical shiver and said, "Please no, I'm too tired to reconstruct my alcoholism from memory." Everyone laughed. That's the thing about funny people, they can move a situation away from truth with one well-timed joke. In the end, we split the drinks portion evenly too. I went home so angry I cried while taking off my earrings. Mikkel found me in the bathroom muttering, "It's not even about the money," which is always how you know it is partly about the money. But it truly wasn't only that. It was the feeling of being managed, of being socially cornered into subsidizing someone who relied on our politeness as part of her lifestyle. Over the holidays, I had some distance from the group. I went to Aarhus to see my parents, ate too much, walked by the harbor, tried not to think about it. My mother, who can sense moral irritation in me before I say a word, eventually got the whole story over tea. She listened, then said something so simple I almost got annoyed. "Why do you keep paying?" "Because it's awkward." "And which part is more awkward, darling? Paying for her again, or saying one honest sentence?" I said, "It's not one honest sentence. It's detonating a social norm." My mother buttered another piece of bread and said, "Then perhaps the norm deserves detonation." That would have been lovely advice if I were the sort of person who enjoys conflict. I am not. I can write sharp emails at work and advocate fiercely for other people, but in my own relationships I default to smoothing, accommodating, reframing. I am very good at making myself reasonable. I can understand almost anyone into one more chance. So instead of coming back to Copenhagen ready to have a clean conversation, I came back with a pit in my stomach and a series of increasingly petty fantasies, all of which involved printed receipts and itemized justice. January was busy, and we didn't meet for a while. During that time, something subtle happened in the group chat. People got slower to respond when dinners were mentioned. Suggestions stalled, energy dipped. I don't think it was only because of Sane, but I do think she had become a drag point nobody wanted to name. Once, Jonas messaged me privately after I proposed a new restaurant and asked, "Do you think this place does separate bills?" He tried to sound casual, but it said everything. That was when I realized the problem had outgrown my personal annoyance. It was starting to affect whether the group even wanted to gather. I suggested a potluck at my flat instead, and everyone replied enthusiastically within minutes. Sign came too, bringing a beautiful cake from a patisserie that probably cost more than the rest of our homemade contributions combined. Part of me thought maybe this was her way of balancing things out, knowingly or not. The night was easy, relaxed, actually fun. No bill drama, no mental arithmetic. I noticed everyone seemed lighter, so maybe the obvious solution was just to stop doing restaurant dinners. But that felt unfair too, because why should the entire shape of our social life change around one person's behavior? A few weeks later, Sign texted me separately, "We should do a proper dinner soon. I miss our little rituals." I stared at that message for ages. Our little rituals. I wondered whether she truly had no idea that the ritual was corroding from the inside, or whether she sensed it and assumed no one would ever challenge her. I said maybe yes, things have been hectic, cowardly. I know. Then came the dinner that finally changed how I saw her. It was just the two of us. She asked if I wanted to meet after work because she needed to pick my brain about a man she had been seeing, a Belgian documentary producer named Luc who, from her early descriptions, sounded exhausting in a tasteful scarf. We met at a small wine bar in Indre. I almost canceled because I was tired, but some stubborn part of me still wanted to preserve the friendship outside the group problem. The evening started well. We talked for hours. She was funny and self-aware and devastatingly accurate about Luc's emotional incompetence. I remembered why I had liked her so much to begin with. Then we ordered food. I kept mine simple because I had plans the next day and, frankly, because by then I had started unconsciously guarding my spending around her. Sign ordered generously. Not shocking at a wine bar, but noticeable. Cheese, charcuterie, olives, 2 extra glasses beyond what I had, and dessert. When the bill came, before I could say anything, she leaned back and said, smiling, "You can just put it on your card and I'll transfer you." Fine, great, adult, easy. I paid. She transferred me €20 less than her half. Not a tiny rounding difference. Not an accident that could be explained by tips or memory. A clear underpayment. I stared at the notification and felt something inside me go completely cold. I messaged it, "I think you may have missed one of your glasses and the dessert." She sent back, "Oh, did I? I just did rough math from memory lol. Can I get you next time? Can I get you next time?" That phrase in another context would sound harmless, friendly. But to me, after months of this, it sounded like an operating system. There's always a next time in which the imbalance will somehow magically correct itself, except it never does. The future becomes a storage closet for unpaid consideration. I replied, "Could you send the rest? Money is a bit tight for me at the moment." That was true, but I hated having to justify asking for exact payment on an exact expense. She sent it with a thumbs up and then nothing else. No apology. No embarrassment. No, sorry, I'm a mess. Just the thumbs up. After that, something in me hardened. It wasn't rage anymore. Rage is hot and active. This was cooler and sadder. I started thinking about all the times I had defended her internally, all the emotional labor I had done to preserve the possibility that she was simply oblivious. But people are not oblivious in a vacuum. Obliviousness that repeatedly benefits one person at the expense of others becomes a moral choice, whether consciously engineered or not. I began scaling back how much I engaged with her. Not dramatically. I still answered messages, still saw her in groups, still behaved warmly. But the instinctive closeness was gone. I no longer volunteered my time so freely. I didn't offer to organize one-on-one plans. I stopped being the first person to soothe, host, or accommodate. And then, inevitably, the next group dinner question appeared. This time it was for Amalie's birthday. She wanted something low, key, and because she's a resident doctor with no energy for logistics, I offered to arrange it. We found a Greek place with decent prices and good reviews. Before confirming, I hesitated over the group chat for a ridiculous amount of time, staring at Sign's name. My first thought was I could just not invite her. Not in a dramatic, you're out of the group forever way. More in a practical, self-protective way. Amelie was closer to the rest of us through work and long friendship. Sane had joined later through me. It would be easy enough to frame it as a smaller dinner, and for one shameful moment I felt pure relief at the thought. No tension, no calculation, no resentment. Just a normal meal with people who understood that shared pleasure does not mean exploiting the path of least resistance. Then I immediately felt guilty, because exclusion is not nothing. To quietly leave someone out without explanation is its own kind of cruelty, even when you can justify it to yourself. So instead I invited her, and then I did something I should have done a year earlier. In the group chat, before anyone could say anything else, I wrote, just so it's easy on the night, let's all pay for our own orders separately. There. 7 seconds of courage. Everyone reacted positively. Jonah sent a clap emoji. Clara wrote perfect. Amali said bless. Even Nicolaj, who almost never uses exclamation points, responded, good idea. Sign was silent for several hours. Then she replied, sure, if that's what people prefer. That smiley face nearly gave me an aneurysm. I cannot fully explain the tone unless you've spent years decoding passive-aggressive punctuation from people who pride themselves on seeming breezy. It read to me like mild injury dressed as accommodation, as if I had introduced an unnecessary rigidity into what had once been a fluid, charming social world. At dinner, she arrived late again, though only by 10 minutes. She was pleasant, maybe slightly cooler than usual. We all ordered. And this is the interesting part. Once separate payment was explicit, Sign ordered differently. Not drastically, but noticeably. She still got a nicer main than most people, but no extravagant starter. 1 glass of wine, not 3. No dessert, no dramatic add-ons. It was like watching the curtain slip. The performance of abundance only made sense when partially underwritten by others. I felt vindicated and depressed at the same time. The bill came, was handled individually, and took maybe 3 extra minutes. 3 minutes, that was all. 3 minutes for a process I'd been allowing to shape months of resentment. Afterward, walking home with Mikkel and Clara, there was a kind of stunned mood among us. Clara finally said, well, that answers that. Because it did. If Sign had continued ordering exactly the same way under a separate pay setup, I might have had to entertain the possibility that she simply liked expensive food and had assumed quality was normal. But the immediate behavioral change told its own story. And yet, maddeningly, that should have solved everything, except it didn't. Because after that dinner, Sign started declining more invitations. Not all, but many. If the plan involved a restaurant, she was suddenly busy, overwhelmed, out of town, low on cash, or keeping things simple this month. She came to house gatherings, park drinks, birthdays at flats. She skipped most dinners. And when she did come, she often made little comments. Nothing direct enough to confront cleanly. Just things like, I miss when we all used to be less formal with each other, or it's funny how adulthood turns everything into accounting, said while swirling wine she'd brought from her favorite overpriced shop. I know those comments were aimed at me, even if nobody else registered them as such. Then something happened that made me feel both justified and deeply sad. Jonas had a birthday dinner at a Spanish restaurant I didn't organize. Separate bills were mentioned at the start because by then it had become an established norm. Sign came, ordered modestly, and halfway through the meal, after 2 glasses of wine, she made an offhand joke to Jonas that I happened to hear because I was sitting close. Your lot have become very Protestant about restaurant math. Your lot, not our group, your lot. And suddenly I understood that she had reclassified us in her mind. We were no longer intimate enough to absorb costs without scrutiny, which meant we had failed some test of ease or generosity or class performance she valued. The comment wasn't just about money. It was about identity. She thought itemizing a bill was gotch, unsophisticated, a little small. But of course it's very easy to find precision tacky when imprecision reliably favors you. I didn't say anything then because it was Jonas's birthday and I refused to let her drag me into a scene. But I went home feeling the dull ache of seeing a friendship clearly at last. The version of Sign I had loved was still real, I think. The warmth, the wit, the care in moments of crisis. But another part was real too, the entitlement, the social maneuvering, the subtle contempt for boundaries when they inconvenienced her. I had spent so long trying to merge those versions into one understandable whole that I hadn't let myself admit the obvious. Some people are not either good or bad in the ways we want them to be. They are simply charming enough that their selfishness takes longer to cost them anything. Now I'm at the point where I'm genuinely considering stopping inviting her to dinners altogether, not banning her from my life, not creating a dramatic friend group tribunal, just quietly letting restaurant plans happen without her, especially if I'm the one arranging them. Partly because I'm tired, partly because even with separate bills now, the whole atmosphere shifts when she's there. I find myself watching her, anticipating the comments, wondering whether she'll make some pointed remark about stinginess or spontaneity. It's exhausting to host someone you no longer trust socially. But I keep getting stuck on the fairness of it. If I stop inviting her without saying why, then I'm doing the very thing I dislike, relying on silence and social pressure instead of honesty. But if I tell her the truth, I can already imagine exactly how it will go. She'll look wounded. She'll say she had no idea anyone felt that way. She'll insist it was never intentional. She'll probably make me sound harsh by being soft. And because the amounts were always dispersed and socially obscured, I'll end up sounding obsessive, like some grim accountant who kept emotional receipts. There's also the possibility that she honestly doesn't understand the full effect of what she was doing. That maybe in her family or previous social circles, even splitting was the default no matter what people ordered. That maybe she genuinely thinks being easygoing means not quibbling over details. But that explanation gets harder to accept when I remember her instantly ordering less once separate payment was declared. People tell on themselves through adaptation. Another complication is that not everyone in the group wants conflict. Clara is done with Sign emotionally, I think. Amali would happily survive never seeing her at a table again. Mikkel thinks I should say something once, clearly, and then stop carrying it. Jonas dislikes tension so much he'd probably rather finance Sign's oysters forever than sit through a confrontation. Nikolaj, unsurprisingly, thinks the problem has mostly been solved since bills are separate now, though even he admitted the comments afterward were irritating. And maybe that's the adult answer. The logistical problem is solved, the emotional residue just needs time. But I'm not sure it works like that. Once you feel used by someone, even in a relatively ordinary social way, it changes the texture of being around them. I don't feel relaxed with Sign anymore. I feel alert, curious in the wrong way, like I'm waiting for a small theft of comfort. What makes this harder is that if she were reading this, I know exactly how unreasonable she'd think I sounded. She would probably describe herself as someone who loves good food, generous evenings, shared experiences, and friends who don't nickel and dime each other. She would not frame the story as I repeatedly exploited my friend's aversion to awkwardness. She would frame it as the group changed. And maybe that's what keeps bothering me most, how easy it is for selfishness to disguise itself as style. I still think about the first years of our friendship and wonder whether I missed other signs because I was dazzled by how alive she seemed. There are people who make you feel interesting simply by paying attention to you, and it can take a long time to notice that their attention is partly a method. Not malicious, maybe not even calculated in a villainous way, but still a method. They charm, they draw warmth from a room, and they rely on other people to absorb the friction they create. Everyone gets a story, they get a softer landing. I don't know. Maybe this sounds too serious for what is, on paper, a recurring restaurant issue. But I think these things are never just about the receipt. Money reveals assumptions. It reveals whose comfort gets protected, whose embarrassment gets avoided, whose labor remains invisible. Every time the waiter asked how to split the bill, there was a tiny moral test at the table. Not about arithmetic, but about whether honesty or ease would win. For months, ease won, or rather, the appearance of ease. The cost was just redistributed quietly enough that we could all pretend nothing had happened, and now I'm tired of pretending. So that's where I am. Separate billing is now the default, which has fixed the practical issue. But the trust is gone, and I'm seriously considering no longer inviting Sign to restaurant dinners I organize because I no longer enjoy them when she's there, and because part of me resents that it took one explicit boundary to reveal what I suspected all along. I haven't confronted her directly. I haven't told the wider group I'm considering leaving her out. I just keep hovering at that ugly adult threshold where every option feels a little mean and a little necessary. Maybe the answer is one blunt conversation. Maybe the answer is distance without drama. Maybe the answer is to accept that some friendships are better in living rooms than at tables with menus. All I know is that the next time a waiter asks whether we're splitting equally, I want to be able to answer without first checking whose appetite I'm expected to subsidize. Story 2. I'm starting to feel like I'm not dating one woman, I'm financing an entire family's refusal to grow up. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until I caught myself feeling relieved when my girlfriend didn't answer my call because for one full hour I knew nobody could ask me for money, a ride, a favor, or a rescue. I'm writing this in more of an R true off my chest, our relationship advice kind of style, because I honestly don't know if I need advice, a reality check, or just someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. I'm 32 from Leeds, and for the last 2.5 years I've been with my girlfriend, Hannah, who is 29. When we first met, I thought she was one of those people who had just had a rough patch and needed stability. Now I'm sitting here wondering if I completely misread the entire situation and accidentally attached myself to a whole family of women who have built their lives around acting incapable until some man gets tired enough to do everything for them. That sounds cruel, and if you'd asked me a year ago if I could ever describe Hannah that way, I would have said absolutely not. I would have defended her. I did defended her, constantly. To my mates, to my brother, to my mom, and mostly to myself. When I met Hannah, she was funny, warm, soft-spoken, and had this slightly chaotic charm that at the time I found endearing. We met through mutual friends at a pub near the station after a rugby match I barely cared about. She made some sarcastic comment about the way blokes act after sports, and I laughed because it was dead on. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't one of those people who walks into a room demanding attention. She actually came off almost shy at first, which made it feel like getting to know her was something earned. She asked thoughtful questions, remembered odd details I'd told her, and had that kind of face that looked sincere even when she was winding you up. Back then, she was working part-time at a beauty salon and doing a bit of online reselling, which I later learned meant occasionally listing clothes she never posted. She was living with her younger sister Chloe in a rented flat that was always in some kind of low-level crisis. Boiler weird again, rent delayed, internet cut off, fridge making a noise. One of those places where there is always a story, always a reason things aren't under control, and always an explanation that makes you feel slightly heartless for even noticing how chaotic it all is. At first, I thought she was just overwhelmed. And to be fair, at the start, I liked helping. I'm not some martyr and I'm not pretending I was forced into anything early on. If anything, I stepped into the helper role too willingly because it made me feel needed, dependable, solid. I've always been the one people call when something needs sorting. I'm an operations manager for a small distribution company, which sounds dull because it is, but it means my work brain is basically built around anticipating problems and fixing them before they become disasters. I'm organized, I show up on time, I know where my passport is, I have extra batteries in a drawer. That sort of man. So when Hannah's world looked a bit untidy, I didn't see a warning sign. I saw a place where my strengths could be useful. The first time I lent her money was 3 months in. It was a small amount, just enough to cover part of her rent because her boss had apparently messed up payroll and she was short until the following week. She was embarrassed asking, or at least she seemed embarrassed. She kept saying I could say no, that she hated even bringing it up, that she'd understand if it was too much. I told her not to worry about it. She paid me back late, but she did pay me back, and I didn't think much of it. Then it was her phone bill. Then her electric. Then she needed train fare to visit her nan in Hull because family comes first and she was in tears on the phone. None of these things on their own felt outrageous. Life happens. People get caught short. Especially with the cost of everything now, I know plenty of decent people who've had to juggle bills. But the pattern slowly changed from unexpected shortfall to ongoing way of life. The first sister I really got to know was Chloe, who's 26 and somehow both permanently exhausted and permanently doing absolutely nothing. I mean that literally, she has had more fresh starts than anyone I've ever met, each one announced like a press release. She was going to become a lash technician, then a dog groomer, then a content creator, then a virtual assistant. Then she got very into the idea of healing work despite not wanting to work in any normal sense of the word. Every few months there was a new dream, a new logo mock-up, a new Instagram page with 3 posts and a quote about ambition. And then 2 weeks later, she'd be back on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, saying the universe was giving her signs to slow down. I would have found her ridiculous immediately if it weren't for the way Hannah talked about her. Hannah always framed Chloe as fragile. She's lost. She's sensitive. She just needs support. Not everyone is built for the rat race. At the beginning, I tried to be compassionate. Plenty of people struggle with confidence, direction, anxiety, depression. I'm not one of those people who thinks everyone should just pull themselves together because life is hard. Sometimes it is hard. Sometimes people do need patience. Then I met the older sister, Amelia, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck started lifting. Amelia is 35, has 2 children by 2 different men, lives in Bradford, and speaks with the kind of total confidence that makes her sound authoritative until you actually listen to what she's saying. Her whole personality is built around having been let down by men, but every story somehow ends with a man paying for something. Her ex was useless, according to her, but he still covered school uniforms last year. Her most recent boyfriend was controlling, according to her, but he apparently financed a holiday in Benidorm, bought her a washing machine, and paid half her arrears before finally leaving. Every man in her stories is either cruel, stingy, or immature, yet each one seems to have served as a temporary ladder she climbed while insulting. The first proper family dinner I had with Hannah's sisters should have told me everything. It was at their mum's house in Wakefield, one of those semi-detached places with a decorative bowl nobody can touch and a front room that looks like Christmas exploded in it even in spring. Their mum, Carol, is polite on the surface but has perfected the art of helplessness to such a high level that I genuinely think she trained her daughters in it. Not through deliberate lessons, but by example, she is one of those women who announces minor inconveniences like national emergencies. Her curtain rail is loose, catastrophe. Her council letter is confusing, impossible. Her TV remote needs new batteries. She might as well be trapped in the Alps. She can cook a roast for 7 people, but somehow cannot possibly compare broadband packages or carry a small box to the car. At that dinner, I noticed something strange almost immediately. Every practical thing that came up was, by default, assigned to whichever man was nearest. Carol asked me to fix a dining chair because it wobbled funny. Amelia wanted advice about a car insurance letter, but what she really meant was she wanted me to read it and tell her what to do. Chloe wanted help setting up a payment app she'd apparently tried and failed to understand for literally hours. Hannah asked if I could have a quick look at a lamp in her old room that wasn't working. Meanwhile, the 4 of them sat around discussing celebrity gossip, holidays they couldn't afford, women they knew who'd married well, and how impossible everything was becoming financially. At one point, Amelia laughed and said, "Honestly, I need a rich one next. I'm done struggling." Everyone laughed. Carol said, "Aim higher this time." Hannah said, "Manifest it." And I laughed too, because I thought it was one of those dark jokes people make about money when life is hard. Now, I think it wasn't a joke so much as a family mission statement. The problem is Hannah on her own is never quite as blatant as her sisters. If she were, I'd have walked earlier. She's more subtle. Softer. She doesn't demand, she wilts. She doesn't order, she sighs. If Amelia is a battering ram, Hannah is missed. One pushes directly until you give in. The other creates an atmosphere where refusing feels cruel. Over time, I started noticing that Hannah had almost no adult systems of her own. No savings, no consistent budgeting, no proper plan for work, no urgency about any of it. She was always thinking about a course, looking into a better job, meaning to call someone, trying to sort something. Her whole life lived in the grammar of intention. When real deadlines appeared, she dissolved. And when she dissolved, I stepped in. Need help rewriting your CV? I'll do it. Need me to drive you to an interview in York because trains are a nightmare? Fine. Need me to ring the letting agency because they're ignoring you? I'll handle it. Need me to help challenge a parking fine? Sure. Need me to front groceries till next Thursday? All right. Need me to come over because Chloe's crying and Amelia's shouting and the whole flat feels toxic? Of course. There came a point where I realized I wasn't Hannah's boyfriend in the normal sense anymore. I was the functioning executive wing of a failing state, and the maddening part was that she was always grateful. Or at least performatively grateful enough that I kept suppressing my anger. She'd kiss my cheek and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She'd look at me with those wide, tired eyes and say, "You make me feel safe." She'd tell her friends I was the only reliable person in her life, which sounds lovely until you realize it means you are now expected to compensate for everyone else indefinitely. About a year in, her salon job ended. Depending on which version of the story you believe, she either left because the owner was toxic, got pushed out because she was always late, or simply stopped turning up often enough for them to keep pretending it would improve. Hannah said it was mutual. I never got the truth. What I do know is that from that moment onward, the balance in our relationship shifted hard. She said she wanted to use the time to reset and figure out what she really wanted. Again, on paper, fair enough. People change careers. People burn out. People need a month, maybe even 2. This became 6 months, then 9. During that time, she did bits of work here and there, a friend's nails, some online selling, helping Chloe with one of her doomed business ideas. Babysitting Amelia's kids sometimes, though Amelia rarely paid her. She spoke constantly about independence while drifting further from it. I started covering more and more. First dinners out, then groceries, then petrol when I was the one driving everywhere, then random things like toiletries, takeaway, prescriptions, birthday presents for her nieces because she was short that week and didn't want to look bad. I told myself it was temporary. Then one afternoon, I found myself in a retail park on a Saturday buying school shoes for children that were not mine because Amelia had had some row with her ex. The maintenance payment hadn't come through yet. The oldest needed shoes by Monday. Hannah was stressed because the kids shouldn't suffer. And somehow that whole chain of logic ended with me standing under fluorescent lights holding 2 boxes and trying not to feel like an absolute mug. I remember texting my friend Owen from the car park. Do I look insane from the outside? He replied, Mate, yes. Owen has never liked Hannah, though to be fair, he didn't dislike her in some irrational way. He disliked what I became around her. He'd seen me cancel plans because Hannah was having a crisis. He'd watched me loan cash I clearly wasn't comfortable loaning. He once sat in my kitchen while I spent 40 minutes on the phone talking Chloe through how to upload documents for universal credit because apparently no one in that household could interpret a government website without male intervention. He said something back then that I didn't want to hear. It's not that they can't do things. It's that it works better for them when they don't. That sentence has haunted me because the longer this has gone on, the more true it feels. Helplessness, when genuine, comes with frustration and effort. Hannah and her sisters don't look like people battling against hardship with everything they've got. They look like people who have discovered that confusion is profitable. If a bill is complicated, pass it to a man. If a form is stressful, cry until someone fills it. If rent is short, find a boyfriend, ex, brother, dad, or sympathetic idiot. If work is hard, call it toxic. If responsibility feels heavy, rename it trauma. If someone objects, accuse them of being unsupportive. Before anyone says it, yes, I know that sounds harsh. I know there are real mental health struggles, real financial struggles, real burnout, real abusive dynamics that leave people genuinely dependent or frightened. That's partly why this has been so hard to untangle, because there is always just enough truth in their problems to make you feel monstrous for questioning the pattern. Of course, life is expensive. Of course, childcare is hard. Of course, jobs can be awful. Of course, women do face pressures. Men often don't. I know all of that. But there's a difference between struggling and making struggle your operating system. I started seeing it most clearly around practical tasks. Things they absolutely could do if there were no other option. A simple example. Hannah once called me crying because her car wouldn't start outside a supermarket in Harrogate. She said she was stranded, panicking, didn't know what to do. I left work early, drove 30 minutes, got there, and found that the car was fine, completely fine. The issue was she didn't know how to use the battery pack in the boot and hadn't even read the instructions because it stressed her out. She had gone straight from problem to emotional emergency. I showed her once, calmly. 2 months later, same thing, same panic, same inability. Except this time I asked whether she'd tried the pack. She said no because she was scared of doing it wrong. I talked her through it over speakerphone in under 4 minutes. Suddenly, miracle, she was capable. Another time, Chloe needed to move out of the flat because she'd fallen behind on rent and had a dramatic fallout with the landlord she called predatory, though from what I could tell he mostly wanted the money she owed him. Hannah asked if I could help just for an afternoon. That afternoon turned into an entire weekend of hauling furniture, sorting boxes, driving back and forth, dealing with a van, dealing with Chloe's tears, dealing with Amelia arriving late and offering commentary instead of assistance. At one point, I was carrying a chest of drawers down 2 flights while Chloe stood in the doorway saying she felt faint. Not injured. Not ill. Just emotionally overwhelmed by her own move. Amelia, who is physically capable when shopping sales are on, somehow had a sudden bad back. Hannah was trying, to be fair, but even her version of trying involved constantly getting pulled away into emotional management rather than actual labor. By Sunday evening, I was drenched in sweat. My lower back was screaming, and Chloe hugged me and said, "I literally don't know what we'd do without men." She said it laughing like a joke. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Scream. But I remember looking at Hannah and seeing no discomfort on her face at all, not because she agreed consciously with the sentence, maybe, but because the sentiment felt natural inside that family ecosystem. Men are infrastructure. Men are tools with wallets. Men are stability you date, borrow, flatter, and occasionally resent. Things got much worse when Hannah effectively started spending half her time at my house. At first it was natural. Leave a toothbrush. Then some clothes. Then skincare products colonizing the bathroom shelf. Then her asking whether she could keep a spare key just in case. I live alone in a decent one, bed in Leeds, and compared to the chaos she came from, my place probably felt like an oasis. Quiet, clean, paid on time, food in the fridge, heating that worked because I sort those things before they fail. I didn't mind having her around more. In fact, I liked it. For a while it felt domestic in a comforting way. Then I noticed that as her time at my place increased, her contribution did not. She wasn't paying rent, obviously, because we hadn't agreed to live together. Fine, but she also wasn't really covering groceries, replacing household things she used, or contributing meaningfully to shared costs. Worse, she actually increased them. Longer showers, more takeaway, more electricity, more impulse online orders delivered to my address. She'd talk about our place jokingly, but in the practical sense, it was still entirely my place, funded entirely by me. I tried to bring it up gently once. I said something like, "Now that you're here a lot more, maybe we should figure out food costs a bit better." She went quiet in that hurt way she has, not angry, just disappointed enough to make me feel like I'd kicked a dog. She said she thought relationships weren't supposed to feel transactional. She said she would never let money come between her and someone she loved. She said she hated that the world makes everything about bills and splitting in numbers. And because I'm an idiot, I backed off and ended up apologizing for my tone. Looking back, that conversation was incredibly revealing, not because she screamed or manipulated in some obvious villainous way, but because she turned a practical conversation about fairness into a moral referendum on love. Suddenly, I wasn't discussing groceries. I was defending my character. That's how this family operates. They reframe constantly. If you want boundaries, you're cold. If you want repayment, you're petty. If you want effort, you lack empathy. If you get tired, you're unsupportive. If you point out the obvious, you're cruel for saying it out loud. The sisters do it with each other too. Amelia is forever furious that no one helps her enough as a single mom, yet she routinely dumps her kids on Carole or Hannah with almost no notice. Chloe says nobody believes in her, yet if anyone offers realistic advice, she says they're negative. Hannah says she wants peace, yet she inserts herself into every family drama and then comes to me shattered by problems she volunteered to absorb. Last autumn was when I started truly breaking. My dad had a health scare, not fatal, thank God, but serious enough to remind me how quickly life can shift. I was going back and forth to see my parents, covering extra at work, not sleeping brilliantly, and just generally stretched thin. For maybe the first time in our relationship, I genuinely needed Hannah to be low maintenance for a while. Not perfect, just not another source of constant emergency. Instead, everything intensified. Chloe had another business collapse, this time some handmade candle venture she'd announced with unbelievable confidence, despite not seeming to know anything about supply costs, shipping, branding, or fire safety. Amelia's latest boyfriend left after, as far as I can tell, growing tired of being treated like an ATM with a pulse. Carole became obsessed with the idea that her boiler was dangerous and spent days in a panic before it turned out to need a standard repair. Hannah got dragged into all of it, which meant I got dragged into all of it. One night I came home after a 12-hour day and found Hannah on my sofa crying because Amelia had wrung her screaming about childcare. Chloe needed help paying for materials she'd already ordered for another project, and Carole wanted someone to come over tomorrow to speak to a plumber because she doesn't understand tradesmen. I snapped a bit, not screaming, but I said, "Why is every problem in your family somehow becoming ours?" Hannah looked stunned. Then she said very quietly, "Because we're all each other has." I said, "That's not true. You've got me, and increasingly it feels like everyone thinks that means they've got me too." She cried harder after that, and I spent the next hour comforting her, which sort of proves my own point. There's another part of this that bothers me even more than the money. The contempt I've started hearing under their dependence. That's what's turned my frustration into something uglier. I began noticing how Hannah and her sisters talk about men when they think they're being funny. It's all weaponized incompetence this, and men are babies that, and never do wife things on a girlfriend's salary, and if he wanted to, he would. They share those sorts of posts constantly. Which, fine, internet cliches, everyone says daft things, but hearing women who cannot organize a dentist appointment without outside intervention mock men as useless was pushing me to another plane. One evening, Hannah, Chloe, and Amelia were all in my living room drinking wine while I was making dinner because they'd all had a day. Amelia was ranting about her ex being pathetic because he didn't know where the kids' PE kits were. Chloe said men would die if women disappeared for a week. Hannah laughed and said, honestly, they'd all starve and sit in the dark. I was literally at the stove cooking for them while Amelia's phone, which I had fixed an hour earlier, charged on my table. I said, "That's a bit rich, isn't it?" They all laughed like I was joking. Maybe I was partly, but there was a truth in it. They genuinely seemed to see male support as both necessary and beneath them, which is one of the ugliest combinations I can think of. The biggest blow-up so far happened in January. Hannah and I had been talking vaguely about moving in properly by the end of the year if things kept going well. Not engaged, not anything dramatic, just discussing whether it made sense eventually. I'd already been hesitant, though I hadn't admitted how much. Then one Sunday, while we were at Carol's, Amelia made some offhand comment about how if Hannah moved into mine fully, it would free up space options for Chloe because Chloe was struggling again and might need somewhere temporary. I said, "What does that mean?" Amelia said, "Oh, nothing. Just if Hannah's not paying for a room there anymore, it might help Chloe breathe a bit." That caught my attention because Hannah had previously told me she was contributing almost nothing now at the flat anyway and mostly just helping with bits when she could. I asked later, privately, what exactly she was paying toward that flat. Turns out almost nothing was generous. She was still supposedly on some bills, but in practice I had become her main support while she maintained this loose tie to her old place for convenience and family chaos. When I asked how much she'd saved during all this time by staying with me so often, she got defensive immediately and said saving had been impossible because there was always something happening. I said, "There is always something happening because no one in your family ever builds any buffer for anything." That was the first proper row we had. She said I was judging her family for struggling. I said I was judging them for refusing change the patterns that keep them struggling. She said I sounded like I thought I was better than them. I said I think I'm more responsible than them. Yes. She said that was arrogant. I said maybe, but it's also true. She said I had no idea what women in her family had been through. I said maybe not, but being let down in the past does not entitle you to draft me into permanent repair work. I've never seen her face go so cold, not tearful cold. She asked, "So is that what I am to you?" "Work." I said no, but being with you has become a huge amount of work. That landed badly, maybe cruelly. But it was honest. She left and ignored me for nearly 2 days. In that silence, instead of panicking like I usually would, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not joy, not revenge, just peace. No calls about school pickup. No texts asking if I could send a bit till Friday. No quick question about whether I could look over a form. No emotional debrief about another sister drama. No obligation to drive anywhere, fix anything, soothe anyone. I slept better in those 2 days than I had in ages, which was deeply depressing information to receive about my own relationship. When she finally came back round, she did what she always does after a serious conflict. She softened. She apologized for getting defensive. She said she knows her family is a lot. She said she never meant to make me feel used. She said she loves me because I'm stable, kind, and safe. She said I'm the first man who's really been there for her. And again, that sounds lovely. It should have melted me completely. A big part of me wanted it too. But another part of me heard, "I love what you provide, Because what exactly has changed since that conversation? Not enough. She's trying a little more, I'll give her that. She picked up some more salon shifts with an old contact. She's been covering the odd takeaway here and there. She even insisted on buying groceries once and made a point of showing me the receipt like she wanted recognition for participating in basic adulthood. But the deeper pattern remains untouched. The family still swirls around her. She still swirls around them. And I still end up absorbing the cost when the swirl hits something solid. Last week was the moment that made me sit down and write this. It was a Thursday. I'd had a rough day. End of quarter. Staffing issue. One driver off sick, one van delayed, one client threatening to escalate over something that wasn't even our fault. I got home wanting silence. Instead, I found Hannah in my flat with Chloe, who I had not invited, both sitting at the kitchen table looking grave. Before I'd even taken my coat off, Chloe said, "Can I ask you something without you getting stressed?" That sentence alone nearly made me leave again. The short version was that Chloe had messed up another payment arrangement, was at risk of losing her car, and needed short-term help. Not from a bank, not from the dad who occasionally helps, not by selling the designer bag she somehow still owns, but from me. Hannah was sitting there looking worried, already halfway in Chloe's corner emotionally. I asked how much. It was not a small amount. Not catastrophic, but enough that the fact they could ask it with straight faces made me feel sick. I said no. No, let me think. Not maybe part of it, just no. The silence in that kitchen was unreal. Chloe blinked like I'd broken some social code. Hannah looked shocked and then hurt, immediately hurt, as if I'd humiliated her personally. Chloe started explaining why it wasn't what it sounded like, how she wasn't asking for a handout, how she'd pay it back, how this would really change things for her. I said no again. I said I am not financing any more emergencies created by adults who never prepare for anything. I said I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but I'm done being the safety net for people who keep jumping. Chloe cried, obviously. Hannah took her side without fully saying so, which is her specialty. She kept saying she's just in a panic and this is really serious, and I thought maybe you'd understand because you know how hard it's been. I said understanding and paying are not the same thing. Chloe eventually left in tears. Hannah stayed, and we had another massive argument. She said I embarrassed her sister. I said her sister embarrassed herself by coming to my flat to ask for money like I'm an overdraft facility. She said family helps each other. I said I am not her family's financial plan. She said I lack compassion. I said compassion without boundaries is just exploitation with good manners. She said I'd changed. I said yes, because I finally noticed what's been happening. Then she said something I can't unhear. She said, for someone who does so much, you love making people feel bad about it. And that to me was the whole rotten core of it. Not gratitude, not partnership. Resentment. Resentment that the man doing the lifting has feelings about the weight. I asked her to leave after that. Not break up. Just leave for the night. I've seen her twice since. Once for coffee, which felt tense and fake, and once yesterday when she came by to collect a few things. Both times she acted like I was overreacting to isolated incidents instead of responding to a pattern that has shaped our entire relationship. She keeps saying things like it's not always about money, which is true, except when money and labor and problem solving all flow one way for years, you don't get to separate them anymore. What's messing with my head now is that I do still love her, or at least I love the version of her that shows up when it's just us on a good day, before some crisis or sister or bill enters the room. When she's relaxed, she's wonderful. Funny, affectionate, easy to be around. We can have whole Sundays that feel warm and ordinary and genuinely happy. She'll make tea, curl up against me, talk about silly things, ask me about work, rub the back of my neck when I'm tense. Those moments feel real. I'm not inventing them, but increasingly they feel like ad breaks between demands. And I'm starting to suspect that what I experience as love, she experiences partly as relief. Relief that someone competent is here. Relief that she doesn't have to sink. Relief that the next form, bill, fight, repair, school run, transport issue, rent panic, or emotional collapse might be handled by someone broader shouldered than she is. I can't marry relief. I can't build a life on being useful. I don't want children one day with a woman whose family already treats me like a communal resource. I can already see the future if I stay and don't force a real change. Amelia's kids needing lifts, Chloe temporarily staying with us, Carole needing help with every bit of paperwork until she dies, Hannah wanting to take time out from work every time life gets difficult because she knows I'll catch her. Me becoming one of those men who looks permanently tired at barbecues, quietly paying for everything while being told I'm lucky to have a family. And the worst part is, I think if I told Hannah all of this in exactly these words, she still wouldn't fully get it. She'd hear contempt where I feel exhaustion. She'd hear judgment where I feel fear. She'd hear rejection of her family where what I actually want is simple. Adults who do not treat helplessness like a personality. So now I'm stuck in this miserable place where I'm asking myself whether I'm being heartless or whether I've just finally reached the point every mug reaches where the spell breaks and he sees the setup for what it is. I don't think Hannah and her sisters are sitting around a table in Wakefield plotting how to drain men. I'm not making them Bond villains. It's almost worse than that. I think this is just their culture, their normal, their inheritance. Women flutter, panic, defer, complain, hint, cry, and survive by attaching themselves to someone more stable. Men provide and then get mocked for not being emotionally intelligent enough. Everyone resents everyone else, but the system continues because it works just well enough. Maybe gold diggers is too crude a phrase. Maybe lazy is too simple. But I cannot think of a kinder way to describe able-bodied adults who repeatedly choose dependence while speaking as if dependence is something inflicted on them by the universe. All I know is I am tired down to the bone, and I've started fantasizing about a relationship where a problem appears and the woman beside me says, "I've got it," instead of looking at me like the cavalry has arrived. Story 3. My girlfriend is pregnant with twins, and after one argument, she showed me a video with her ex. I do not know what to do. I thought the worst thing that could happen in one fight was that someone says something cruel they regret. I was wrong. In less than 10 seconds, the woman I had planned my whole life around turned our future into something I could no longer look at without feeling sick. I am Lucas, I am 28, and I live in Brno. My girlfriend Aliska is also 28. We have been together for a little over 5 years, and until recently I would have described our relationship as solid in the kind of boring, adult way that actually means good. Not perfect, not dramatic, not one of those relationships where every week feels like a film. We had routines. We had shared rent, shared groceries, shared jokes that would not make sense to anyone else, and shared plans that felt real enough to touch. We knew which side of the bed each of us would end up on even if we switched for a night. We knew how the other took coffee, when the other needed silence, and how to apologize after a bad day. For a long time, that felt like love in its most reliable form. About 3 months ago, we found out she was pregnant. A month after that, we found out it was twins. The pregnancy changed the atmosphere in our flat almost overnight. Not in a bad way at first, in a stunned way, like we had both opened a door expecting to see one room and found an entire city behind it. We sat in the car after the appointment in silence for almost 10 minutes. Then Aliska laughed, then cried, then laughed again, and I held the steering wheel and just stared at the dashboard because I could feel how fast life had suddenly moved. We were not talking about abstract future children anymore. We were talking about two actual human beings who would need cots, bottles, names, doctor visits, school places, money, time, patience, and a version of us that was steadier than the one we had been. I will be honest about my part in all of this. I did not handle the shock with grace. I did not run away, and I did not become cold, but I went into problem-solving mode so hard that I probably stopped feeling like a partner and started feeling like an accountant. I made spreadsheets. I priced everything. I started talking about moving to a larger place, cutting expenses, maybe delaying a holiday we had been discussing, whether I should ask for more hours or consider a different job. I work in logistics for a furniture supplier outside the city, and I do not hate it, but I do not earn the kind of money that makes twins feel easy. Aliska works in marketing for a small travel company. Her pay is decent, but her office has been unstable for a year, and even before the pregnancy, she would come home tense from changes in management and constant restructuring. I thought I was being responsible. Maybe I was, but responsibility is not tenderness, and I think I gave her too much of the first and not enough of the second. At the same time, she changed too, and I do not mean that in the lazy way some men talk about pregnant women as if hormones erase accountability. I mean, she became more frightened than she would admit and more defensive than I had ever seen. She started reading forums late at night and scaring herself with stories about difficult births, financial stress, absent fathers, children with health issues, women who never recognized their own bodies again after pregnancy. She would send me links while I was at work and ask if I had looked into this stroller or that hospital or if we should be worried about preterm birth. Sometimes she wanted reassurance and sometimes she wanted control. I tried to give both and I was not especially good at either. Still, until yesterday, I believed we were under strain, not falling apart. For context, there is one piece of history that matters. Aliska has an ex named Merrick. They were together on and off from university into their mid-20s. I never liked how present he remained in the background of stories, not because she spoke about him lovingly, but because she spoke about him like a wound that had healed badly. The kind of wound that closes on the surface but stays tender underneath. From what I understood, he was charming, inconsistent, emotionally manipulative, and always on the edge of leaving. She once told me he had a talent for making her feel wanted at exactly the moment she was ready to walk away. I have known men like that. Some of them know exactly what they are doing, and some just drift through people like weather. Either way, the damage is real. When we first got together, I asked if there was anything unresolved there. She said no. I believed her. A year into our relationship, his name came up because he had messaged her around Christmas. She showed me the message herself and rolled her eyes. It was one of those lazy, nostalgic attempts at contact that says just enough to see if the door is still unlocked. She ignored it. I appreciated that. Once or twice after that, there were brief mentions. Someone had seen him in Prague. He had apparently broken up with someone else. He had sent another message after his father died, not to restart anything, according to her, just because grief makes people reach backward. She answered politely and then stopped. As far as I knew, that was the end of it. I never asked to see her phone. I never wanted to become that person. Trust is easy when nothing challenges it. I know that now. Yesterday started badly, but in a completely ordinary way. I woke up late because I had been up half the night reviewing our budget. The twins had become real in a new way after our latest scan, and I had this pressure in my chest that I could not shake. We were supposed to drive to Alamak in the afternoon to have lunch with Aliska's mother, Hannah, and her stepfather, Daniel. I did not want to go. Not because I dislike them. Hannah can be overbearing, and Daniel has the gift of making every conversation sound like a practical exam, but they are not bad people. I just wanted one Saturday without family voices, medical talk, advice, and subtle judgment. I wanted to stay home, build the second shelf in the spare room, and think. Aliska, understandably, took my reluctance personally. She said her mother had already cooked, that Hannah was excited, that since the pregnancy her family felt I was distant. I said I was tired and could not spend every weekend performing gratitude for everyone. The moment I said performing gratitude, I knew I had chosen the wrong words. It was true in the way some truths are useless because they only wound. Aliska went quiet in that dangerous way where the room starts cooling before the storm arrives. We still got in the car. We still drove out of Brno. We made it about 20 minutes before the argument properly began. It started with money, as many serious arguments do. She asked if I had actually transferred my half for the private clinic deposit. I said yes, but I might need to move some money back briefly on Monday because my car needed repairs. She stared at me and said that was exactly what frightened her. That every week some new expense appeared. That I kept saying we would manage, but the numbers never relaxed. I said she was not helping by ordering baby clothes already when the children were not even here yet. She said she had bought 6 basic items, not a designer nursery. I said that was not the point. She said the point was that I treated every purchase like a moral failure. I said the point was that twins were not theoretical and we could not keep living like two people with time to improvise. Looking back, neither of us was really talking about money. She was talking about security. I was talking about fear. Then it moved to work. She said she felt alone because every time she tried to talk about how overwhelmed she was, I answered with planning instead of comfort. I said every time I tried to talk about practical realities, she heard it as criticism. She said, maybe because I sounded critical. I said maybe because everything was suddenly about her feelings and none of it was about what I was carrying too. That one landed hard. She turned toward the window and said quietly that of course it was not about her body, her exhaustion, her nausea, her fear, her job, and the fact that she was carrying 2 babies. I said that was not what I meant. She said it was close enough. We should have stopped there. We should have pulled over somewhere near Viskov, had coffee at a roadside station, and come back to the conversation when we were calmer. Instead, we kept driving and sharpening each other. By the time we arrived in Alamak, we were both brittle. Lunch was a strained theater performance. Hannah kept asking if I was pale because I was worried, which only made me more tense. Daniel started talking about costs and how men my age often underestimate how much children change their freedom. Aliska went to the bathroom twice and came back looking like she had been crying. I wanted to touch her shoulder and ask if she wanted to leave, but I was still angry enough to sit on my hands instead. On the drive back, the silence lasted all the way to Brno. That silence was not peace. It was two people preserving ammunition. Once we got home, the argument restarted before either of us had taken our coats off. She said she was humiliated by how distant I had been at lunch. I said she had thrown me into that situation after we were already fighting. She said she needed support, and I made her look abandoned. I said maybe I felt abandoned too, because for months I had been trying to keep us steady while she alternated between panic and denial. She asked what denial meant. I said it meant pretending that buying soft blankets and watching nursery videos online was the same thing as preparing for two actual infants. She laughed at that, but not with humor. She said at least she was emotionally present, unlike me. I said emotionally present was a convenient phrase for constantly exploding and then blaming hormones. She told me not to reduce everything to hormones. I told her not to use pregnancy as a shield every time she was cruel. That was the moment the fight changed shape. She stepped back like I had slapped her. Then her face went flat. I had seen that expression only once before, years ago, when a colleague at her office took credit for something she had done, and she decided, very calmly, to destroy him in a meeting with facts. It was the face she made when warmth left the room. She said if I thought she was cruel, then maybe I did not know what cruel looked like. I asked what that was supposed to mean. She said nothing at first. She took out her phone. I assumed she was texting someone, maybe her sister Petra, who she often vented to. Instead, she unlocked the screen, opened what looked like an old gallery folder, and held the phone up toward me. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. It was a dimly lit video, maybe filmed years ago, maybe in a student flat or cheap rented room. Then my brain caught up. It was Aliska, younger but unmistakably Aliska, and Marek. There was no ambiguity about what was happening. It was intimate, explicit, and old enough that I knew it had to predate me. But age did not matter in that second. Context did not matter. All I could feel was the shock of seeing the mother of my unborn children place that image between us like a weapon. She did not play the whole thing. Maybe 5 seconds, maybe less, then she lowered the phone. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember a tram outside. I remember the blood rushing in my ears so hard that for a moment I thought I might faint. I asked her why. Not loudly. That is the part that keeps coming back to me. I did not shout. I did not smash anything. I did not call her names. I just asked why, because my mind could not organize itself around any other word. She said she wanted to hurt me. I asked if that was supposed to make it better. She said no. Then I asked something I did not even know I was thinking until it came out. I asked why she still had it. That question changed her expression. The anger was still there, but now shame entered with it. She looked at the floor and said she did not know. She said it was old, buried, forgotten. She said she had never gone through everything on her phone properly, and some things had transferred from old backups over the years. She said she had found it again a few weeks ago while deleting files because she needed storage. She said she did not watch it fully. She said she should have deleted it then. She said she kept it for no reason. Then she corrected herself and said maybe not for no reason, maybe because deleting it felt like reopening something ugly, and she did not have the energy. I asked if she had been in contact with him. She said no. I asked if there were more videos. She did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Then she said maybe a few old things. She was not sure. They had been stupid back then. People filmed things. I asked if she had watched them during our relationship. She said no. I asked if she had ever missed him. She said that was not fair. I remember laughing, then a dry, ugly laugh that did not sound like me. Not fair. As if fairness had survived the last minute. She tried to come closer and I stepped back. She started crying. Real crying, not strategic. I know the difference. She said she was sorry. She said she had wanted to hit the one place she knew would break me. She said she had felt cornered, judged, terrified, and alone, And in that moment, she wanted me to feel 1/10 of what she was feeling. She said she knew immediately it was unforgivable. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs felt unreliable. She stayed standing, one hand on the counter, one hand over her mouth. The flat looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Our coats on hooks, the shopping bag on the floor, a tiny pair of socks someone had gifted us folded near the fruit bowl. Normal objects, ordinary life. And suddenly none of it belonged to the future I thought I recognized. There are many kinds of betrayal. If she had cheated physically last week, I would know what category to put my pain in. If I had found old messages and lies, I would know where the story started. But this was different. This was an old sexual memory she preserved, then used deliberately at the moment she most wanted to injure me. It was not only about Merrick. It was about the choice she made in that instant. She reached for humiliation as if it were available to her because somewhere inside she knew where the knife was kept. I asked her if she had shown anyone else. She said of course not. I asked if Merrick knew she still had it. She said she doubted he even remembered half the things they recorded. That sentence made me feel physically ill. Recorded. Plural. Casual. I got up, took my keys, and left. I did not have a plan. I drove around Brno for nearly an hour before ending up outside the apartment of my friend Thomas in Kralovo Pole. Thomas and I have known each other since secondary school. He is one of the few people in my life who does not make everything either softer or sharper than it is. He opened the door, took one look at me, and asked if someone had died. I said not exactly. He made tea. I sat at his kitchen table and told him the whole thing. Not elegantly, probably not even coherently. He interrupted only twice, once to ask if the video was old or recent, and once to ask whether she had admitted contact with Merrick. When I said I did not know what mattered more, the existence of the video, the fact she kept it, or the fact she used it against me, Thomas said all three mattered, but the last one mattered most. I expected him to be angrier on my behalf. Instead, he was careful. He said pregnancy did not excuse emotional violence, but it might explain why she reached for the most destructive things she could find. He said explanation was not absolution. He said if I stayed, I needed to understand that the relationship before this moment was over, whether I wanted it to be or not. He said some people do monstrous things once under pressure and spend the rest of their lives horrified by themselves. Others reveal exactly who they are when pressure strips the polite layers off. The problem is that in the aftermath, it can be hard to tell which is which. I slept badly on his sofa. Around 4 in the morning, I checked my phone. I had 17 messages from Aliska, 3 missed calls, 1 message from Petra asking if I was with Thomas, and another from Hannah saying only that Aliska was unwell and I needed to stop punishing her. That message made me angrier than almost anything else because already the story was shifting in family channels into something simpler, something maternal and sympathetic, something that might leave out the phone entirely if Aliska chose not to tell it. By 7, Aliska had sent a long message. She said she was sorry in a way words could not cover. She said she had deleted everything from her phone after I left. She said she would show me the deleted folder, her backups, anything I wanted. She said there had been no contact with Merrick in years beyond occasional meaningless messages. She said she had never loved me less than him, never wanted anyone else, never doubted the twins were mine, never planned to hurt me this way, and did not know how to ask for forgiveness because she did not think she deserved any. That message should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a new layer of dread. The twins were mine. I had not even asked that, but she offered it anyway. Once certain thoughts enter a room, they do not leave because you tell them to. I replied only that I needed time. The next day, which is now today, I went back to the flat in the late morning because I needed clothes for work tomorrow and because hiding indefinitely in Thomas's spare blanket was not a plan. Aliska was there, sitting on the sofa in one of my old sweatshirts, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were swollen. There was a glass of water on the coffee table, untouched. She stood when I came in and then stopped herself from moving closer. She had deleted the files. She showed me the phone, the deleted folder, the cloud account, old backups she had started reviewing. I watched because I did not know whether refusing would make me stronger or just less informed. There were indeed old videos and photos, not hundreds, but enough to make my stomach turn. Most were clearly from before me. A few included timestamps old enough to prove it. She deleted all of them while I stood there, not theatrically, quietly. She cried once and wiped her face with the back of her hand without speaking. I asked again if she had been in contact with Merrick recently. She handed me the phone. There were old threads, patchy and embarrassing in the way half-dead connections are. A birthday message here. A brief reply there. Nothing recent enough to prove an affair. The last actual exchange was over a year ago. It was cold and forgettable. I should have felt reassured. Instead, I felt tired. Evidence can settle one fear and leave another untouched. Then she told me something I was not prepared for. She said she had found the video weeks ago, as she said last night, but when she found it, she had watched enough to realize what it was and then stopped. Not because she missed Merrick, because she barely recognized herself in it. She said it frightened her to see that version of herself, younger and desperate to please someone who treated her badly. She said she hated that she kept relics from a life where she thought being wanted was the same as being loved. She said every time she meant to delete everything, she felt ashamed and closed the app. Then yesterday, when I accused her of using pregnancy as a shield, something in her snapped and she chose the most poisonous thing available because part of her wanted to make me feel contaminated too. That word stayed with me. Contaminated. I asked if she had ever intended to tell me any of this. She said no, because it felt humiliating and irrelevant. She said everyone has a past. I said not everyone uses it as a live grenade. She nodded and accepted that. We spent the next 2 hours talking in circles that never quite closed. She apologized. I asked questions. She answered some directly, others poorly. I asked whether she understood that I could no longer unsee what she had shown me. She said yes. I asked if she understood that from now on, every cruel word during stress would carry the memory of how far she was willing to go. She said yes. I asked what she expected me to do now. She said she did not know. She said if I needed space, she would accept it. If I wanted therapy together, she would go. If I wanted her to stay with Petra for a while, she would. If I wanted to leave completely, she would not stop me, though she started crying when she said it. I wish I could say there was a clean moral line here. Some people reading this would probably say it is obvious. Leave. Others would say pregnancy changes everything and I should think about the babies first. The problem is that real life is not arranged by principle alone. It is arranged by memory, attachment, fear, logistics, history, guilt, and the simple fact that yesterday morning I still loved this woman in the ordinary domestic way people build over years, and today I do not know what name to give what remains. I went for a walk after that conversation all the way through Luzanki Park and back. It was cold enough that my ears hurt. I tried to imagine separate futures. In one future, I leave now, I find a small rental, split things legally, prepare for co-parenting, and accept that whatever bond made a family possible died the second she held up that phone. That future has the advantage of clarity. It also has the shape of loss so large I can barely stand near it. I do not mean only the loss of her. I mean the loss of morning routines, the loss of being there for every appointment, the loss of the first months with the twins under one roof, the loss of the family unit before it even begins. I know separated parents can raise healthy children. I grew up with both of mine, but Thomas did not, and he turned out steadier than most. Still, I cannot pretend it would not matter. In another future, I stay for the pregnancy and postpone any real decision until after the birth. That sounds mature on paper. In reality, it might simply be delayed collapse. Resentment has a way of seeping into every practical task. Hospital bags, nursery furniture, naming discussions, feeding schedules. I can already imagine myself looking at her across a cot at 3 in the morning and remembering that cold, flat expression before she showed me the video. Children do not need married parents. They do need a home not built on silent corrosion. In a third future, we attempt repair seriously. Not quick forgiveness. Not pretending stress made it meaningless. Actual repair. Therapy, boundaries, total honesty, months or years of rebuilding. Part of me thinks that if people only stayed after small mistakes, no long relationship would survive adulthood. Another part of me thinks that some acts reveal too much to ever truly place behind you. I keep circling back to intent. She did not accidentally hurt me. She selected humiliation. When I came back to the flat, she was asleep on the sofa with one hand over her stomach. For a moment, before memory reassembled itself, I saw only the woman I have spent 5 years loving, her hair partly covering her face, her shoes still on, her breathing uneven in sleep. There was a mug on the table beside her with the tea she had probably made and forgotten to drink. I stood there feeling like I was looking at two truths layered over each other. One was tenderness. The other was damage. Both were real. I covered her with a blanket and immediately hated myself for doing it because it felt like forgiveness I had not chosen. Then I hated myself for thinking that because basic care should not feel like surrender. This is what I mean when I say I no longer know where anything belongs. Later in the evening, Petra came by. I almost left when I heard the buzzer, but Aliska asked if I could stay because she was too exhausted to retell everything with me absent. Petra is 31, practical, blunt, and usually more loyal to truth than comfort. I was grateful for that. Aliska told her what happened, not in all visual detail, but enough. I watched Petra's face harden as the story unfolded. When Aliska finished, Petra sat very still for a moment and then said that what she had done was vile. Not complicated, not understandable. Vile, she said, stress explains many things but not deliberate degradation. Then she turned to me and said I had every right to leave, every right to demand space, and every right not to make any decisions tonight. Oddly, hearing that from her sister helped more than any apology. Not because I wanted allies, because I needed proof that reality still had edges, that this was not going to be smoothed over into one regrettable pregnancy argument among many. After Petra left, the flat was quiet again. Aliska asked if I would at least sleep in the bedroom instead of leaving. I said I would sleep in the spare room. She nodded like she had expected that. Before going to bed, she said there was one more thing I should know. She said when she showed me the video, a part of her wanted me to finally understand how ugly she felt inside. Not ugly physically, ugly in the sense of carrying old shame, old bad choices, old versions of herself she thought she had escaped. She said that did not make what she did any less cruel. It only made it less random. I do not know if that matters. I do not know if motivation makes injury easier to live with, or just gives it a backstory. I lay awake in the spare room thinking about all the places a relationship is held together. Not by love alone, by restraint, by a shared decision, repeated over years, not to use certain knowledge against each other. When you love someone long enough, you gather their weak points almost by accident. Their fear of being left, their insecurity about their body, their family wounds, their old mistakes. Love is partly the choice never to weaponize the map. Yesterday, Aliska unfolded the map and aimed carefully. That is what keeps echoing, not Merrick, not even the fact of the old video, the intention. And yet, I still know things about her that do not fit neatly into villainy. I know how she sat with me in a hospital corridor in Vienna when my father Daniel had chest pain on a work trip, and I thought I might lose him. I know how she once took a train to Ostrava after her own terrible week, just because my grandmother Ivana was lonely after my grandfather died. I know how she leaves notes in my coat pocket when I have hard meetings. I know how softly she has already begun talking to her stomach when she thinks I cannot hear. People are not one moment, but some moments redraw the entire map. A darker thought also started creeping in tonight, one I am ashamed of because I know it may be irrational. When someone can do something this intimate and cruel in the heat of anger, what else might exist beneath the surface that I have never asked about? The paternity comment in her message did not help. I do not actually think the twins are not mine. Nothing concrete points there. But suspicion, once invited into a relationship, behaves like smoke. It finds cracks, it lingers in curtains, it changes how the whole place smells. I hate that I am even thinking about tests and timelines and old backups, and whether I ever truly understood the emotional architecture of the person beside me. I hate that the most important months of our lives may now be filtered through doubt instead of anticipation. There is also the humiliation no one talks about properly. If she had insulted my job, my body, my family, that would still hurt, but it would be ordinary human ugliness. This was sexual humiliation, comparative humiliation, and not even through words. Through evidence, through imagery, through something designed to burn into memory. There is a particular kind of violation in being forced to witness your partner's past intimacy not as context, not as confession, but as punishment. I feel absurd even writing that because it sounds melodramatic, and yet it is exactly true. Tonight she is in our bed and I am in the spare room that was supposed to become part nursery storage in a few months. There are two flat-packed cots leaning against the wall beside me. I spent last week comparing safety ratings for car seats. She spent last week arguing with me about whether sage green was too cold for the baby's room. That life is still technically here. I can touch the boxes. I can hear the washing machine. But emotionally it feels as if someone set fire to the middle of the house and left the walls standing. I keep imagining the children years from now and wondering what kind of father I become from this moment. Do I teach them that some acts should end a relationship no matter the cost? Do I teach them that family sometimes requires surviving what feels unsurvivable? Do I teach them caution, mercy, boundaries, self-respect, patience? I am not even sure which principle belongs here. I thought adulthood would make these things clearer. Mostly it just reveals how often values collide with circumstance. There is one more detail that bothers me in a way I cannot fully explain. When she showed me the video, she did not look wild or out of control. She looked precise. I do not know how to forgive precision. A scream I might understand, a thrown mug, a slammed door. Those are reckless. This was selected, retrieved, presented. That sequence matters to me. At the same time, I also know something ugly about myself from this fight. I pushed her hard with my own words. I was condescending. I treated her fear like impracticality. I spoke about her emotions as problems to manage rather than pain to witness. None of that caused what she did, I know that. But if I am honest, I was not loving in the hours before she became cruel. I was exhausted, superior, and cold. There is a temptation, when you are the more visibly injured person, to edit out your own failures and tell the cleanest version of events. I am trying not to do that. My failures do not excuse hers, but they are part of the landscape that led us here. I do not know what tomorrow looks like. I know I cannot just wake up, make coffee, and behave as if this was one terrible night we can file under stress and move on from. I also know I am not ready to burn everything down while she is carrying our children and apologizing with what seems like genuine horror. Maybe genuine horror is simply what happens when someone sees themselves clearly after the damage is done. Maybe that horror is the beginning of change. Or maybe it is just the natural aftermath of crossing a line no decent person thought they would cross. For now, all I know is that I loved my life on Friday morning, and by Saturday night I was sitting in another room wondering whether the person I planned to raise children with had shown me her worst moment or her truest self. I do not know which answer is harder to live with. Story 4. I stopped finishing my stories when my husband started interrupting them. I did not make this rule to punish my husband. I made it because after years of losing my place in my own sentences, I started to feel like I was disappearing a few words at a time. I am 34, and I live with my husband Rui and our daughter Leonor in Porto. We have been together for 11 years, married for 7, and until recently I would have described our marriage as mostly good in the ordinary way adult marriages are mostly good. We have jobs, routines, bills, inside jokes, shared grocery lists, and the kind of practical intimacy that comes from building a life together for long enough that you stop narrating every small kindness and simply live inside them. He brings me coffee without asking. I remember how he likes his shirts folded. He checks the tires before we drive anywhere far. I know when he is about to get a headache by the way he rubs the bridge of his nose. None of the obvious large disasters are happening. Nobody is cheating. Nobody is gambling away rent money. Nobody is throwing plates. If I try to explain to an outsider why I am so worn down, I know there are people who would hear the problem and think this is all too small to matter. The problem is that it is small every single time. Rui interrupts me constantly. I do not mean in the exaggerated way people use that phrase when they are irritated after one bad dinner. I mean constantly in the literal, repetitive, almost rhythmic way that reshapes the entire emotional climate around a person. If I start telling a story, he jumps in before I reach the middle. If I explain something that happened at work, he corrects a date, a street name, a sequence, or a detail that has nothing to do with the point. If I tell a funny story from my childhood, he supplies the ending before I reach it, or he decides I am not telling it efficiently and retells it in his version. If I am halfway through explaining why something upset me, he starts interpreting my feelings out loud as though I need translation. He says he is helping. That word has become almost unbearable to me. At the beginning of our relationship, I did not see it clearly. Or maybe I saw it and misread it as enthusiasm. Rui comes from a loud family from Braga where conversations overlap like traffic. When I first met them, I was overwhelmed by the speed of everything. His father Joe would begin one story, his mother Teresa would cut in to correct the year, his sister Marta would add a side comment, and his uncle would already be laughing at something only half the table had heard. It felt messy but affectionate, and Rui in that environment seemed animated and easy. He would interrupt me then too, but I thought it was part of the family style, a sign of being engaged. He looked interested, eager, amused. If I paused, he would jump in with what I assumed was support. He remembered details. He linked stories together. He seemed proud of me. At 23, I mistook being edited for being admired. Over time, outside his family, I started noticing that the interruptions had a different effect on me than they did on him. When people interrupt Rui, he becomes more forceful. He talks over them right back. He raises his voice half a degree, leans forward, and somehow emerges more visible. When people interrupt me, my mind scatters. I lose the thread of what I was trying to say. I start deciding silently that maybe the point was not worth making anyway. By the time there is space for me again, the moment has moved on, and I feel childish trying to drag it back. The first time I remember feeling genuinely stung was about 6 years ago at a dinner with friends in Coimbra. Our friend Miguel had asked how Rui and I met, and I started telling the story. It is not a dramatic story, but it is ours. We met at a train station cafe after I missed a connection and he was coming back from a site visit for work. It had rained all morning. My bag was broken. I spilled coffee on my own sleeve, and he offered me napkins and then, somehow, a 2-hour conversation. I was maybe 40 seconds into it when Rui started correcting me. He said it was not raining when we met. It had stopped before. Then he said I was forgetting that I had not missed my train. I had deliberately skipped it because the next one was cheaper. Then he said the funniest part was actually how I had argued with the ticket clerk. And before I knew it, he was telling the whole thing himself while everyone laughed. I smiled because that is what people do when the room has already decided the mood. On the drive home, I told him that bothered me. He looked genuinely puzzled and said we had both been telling it together. Together was his word for it. My word would have been replaced. He apologized in the casual way people apologize for brushing past you in a market, lightly, without changing direction. I accepted it, and because it was one moment in an otherwise pleasant night, I folded it away. If it had stayed occasional, maybe that would have been the end of it. But the thing about repeated minor disrespect is that each individual instance can be argued away while the overall pattern slowly changes your posture in the world. I work at a municipal library in Porto. I run reading programs for children, coordinate community workshops, and sometimes do storytelling sessions for school groups. Words are not abstract to me. Pacing matters. Tone matters. The order in which something is told matters. Sometimes with children, especially the quieter ones, I can see the exact second they decide a story is safe enough to share. It is physical, their shoulders loosen, their eyes lift. They test whether the room will hold what they are trying to say. If another child cuts across them too often, that door closes. You do not always get it open again in the same way. That is what started happening to me at home. Rui never interrupted my work stories because he disliked them. That is important. He laughs at the right parts. He is interested in the people I talk about, especially the children. He asks follow-up questions when I am done. The problem is that he rarely lets me get done. If I say one of the boys in my reading group reminded me of my cousin Nuno at that age, Rui will jump in to explain to whoever is listening that Nuno was actually my second cousin, not my first. If I say an elderly man at the library cried because he found a book his late wife loved, Rui will cut in to identify the book before I finish describing the scene. Because I must mean that novel by Saramago unless it was the other one. No, surely it was this one. He does not understand that the point of a story is not always the inventory of facts. Sometimes the point is the feeling someone is trying to carry across a bridge to another person. There is another layer to this that makes it harder to explain. Rui is charming. He is warm in groups, competent, quick with names, and almost never overtly rude. He does not sneer. He does not shout me down. He interrupts with a smile, with a hand briefly touching my arm, with a tone that makes it sound collaborative. The effect is the same, but because the packaging is pleasant, I look unreasonable if I object too sharply. It took me years to understand that a habit can be dominating even when it wears good manners. About 3 years into our marriage, I tried addressing it directly. Not in the moment, because in the moment I was usually too embarrassed, but the next day when things were calm. I told him I needed him to let me finish when I was speaking, especially in front of other people. He said he did not realize it was that frequent. I gave examples. He accepted some and disputed others. He said sometimes he was only filling in details because I tend to circle around the point. There is truth in that. I do circle. I like context. I build scenes before conclusions. I grew up in a house where stories took time. My mother, Sophia, can spend 10 minutes describing a woman who only appears for 30 seconds in the final anecdote. I inherited some of that, and I know it can be a lot for people who prefer speed. But I also know the difference between having a style and deserving to be cut off. He promised to be more aware. For maybe 2 weeks, he improved. Then the habit returned. A year later, it became more noticeable after Leonor was born. Sleep deprivation made everything rougher around the edges. I was on maternity leave, then part-time for a while, and most adult conversation felt precious because I spent my days moving between feeding, laundry, naps, and that strange suspended time new parents live inside. When friends came over and I tried to tell a story that was not about sleep schedules or rashes, I could feel Rue getting impatient if I took too long. He would summarize, he would clarify, he would clean up the sequence for efficiency. The worst part was that I started hurrying preemptively, rushing through my own thoughts in anticipation of the interruption. I became less articulate because I was bracing for being cut off. One evening when Leonor was about 2, we had my mother over for dinner. I was telling a story about a father at the library who had hidden in the children's corner for 20 minutes because he did not want to admit he had lost the tiny shoe his daughter arrived wearing. It was a funny story because of his face when the shoe turned out to be in his coat pocket the whole time. Before I got to that part, Rui interrupted to explain that fathers are always useless with baby things in the beginning, and then launched into a story about how he once put Leonor's nappy on backwards at 3 in the morning. Everyone laughed. My mother smiled at me, but I recognized the look because I had seen it my entire life when my father used to overtalk her. It was the look of a woman who sees the pattern and knows that calling it out at the table would somehow become its own disruption. After she left, I asked Rue again to stop doing it. This time he got defensive. He said I always waited until after social events and then found a way to criticize how he behaved. He said conversation is not a courtroom where one person gets the floor uninterrupted. He said I interrupt too, which is occasionally true in the normal human sense, but nowhere near the same scale. He said I was becoming overly sensitive and reading intent into something harmless. That word harmless sat with me for weeks. I think one of the loneliest parts of marriage is discovering that the thing slowly wearing you down is invisible to the person creating it. Or worse, visible but dismissed because the injury it causes is hard to measure. If a man breaks a lamp, there is a broken lamp. If he repeatedly makes you feel smaller in social rooms, all you have afterward is your own shrinking confidence, and that is so easy to deny. What changed the situation from irritating to unbearable was Leonor. She is 5 now, bright and observant, with that unsettling child ability to reproduce adult dynamics before you have even admitted them to yourself. About 6 months ago, I was putting her to bed and telling her a story I used to love when I was young, about a fox who steals figs and then becomes convinced the moon is following him because it wants some too. It is a silly story, and I was halfway through when Rui, who was folding laundry in the doorway, interrupted to say that foxes do not eat figs often enough for that to make sense. Leonor laughed because she loves when someone sounds certain. I laughed too, but something in me tightened. I started again, and a minute later he interrupted to ask whether the fox was red or gray, because Leonor had already drawn a gray one that week. Then he started adding his own details, and before long Leonor was turned toward him, waiting for his version. I stopped. Rui asked why I had stopped, and I said because apparently he wanted to tell it. He looked surprised, then mildly annoyed, and said I was overreacting. Leonor asked if the fox still got the moon, and I remember feeling absurdly close to tears over a bedtime story. Not because of the fox, because I suddenly saw our whole marriage miniaturized in that room. I begin. He takes over. The audience turns toward the stronger current. I tell myself it is too small to fight about. Then something in me goes quiet. After Leonor fell asleep, I told him that if he interrupted my stories to her, I would stop telling them. He said that was ridiculous. I said maybe, but I meant it. For a while, I only applied that rule with Leonor. If I was reading or inventing something and Rui cut in, I stopped. At first he laughed and said I was being theatrical. Then Leonor started noticing. Once she actually told him to let Mama finish. He seemed embarrassed for the first time. But outside bedtime, I still kept trying to push through. I would restart sentences. I would say as I was saying, I would raise a finger slightly to signal I had not finished. None of it changed much. If anything, the interruptions became more layered because now there was an argument underneath them. He knew I disliked it, so when he did it and I reacted, his defensiveness arrived faster. We were no longer fighting only about the habit. We were fighting about whether I was allowed to experience it as disrespect. The breaking point came 3 months ago at a lunch in Matosinhos with our friends Katerina and Miguel and Miguel's new partner Eva. We were on the terrace of a seafood place near the water. It was sunny, Leonor was with my mother for the afternoon, and everyone was in that relaxed weekend mood where stories unfold easily. Eva asked what the funniest thing about parenting had been so far, and I started telling a story about the first week Leonor learned to lie convincingly. It was harmless child lying, the kind where she had jam on her face and still insisted the spoon had done it by itself. I had barely set up the moment when Rui interrupted to say the real funny part was not that, it was how Leonor blamed the cat, even though we do not have a cat. Then he corrected the age she had been. Then he said I was mixing it up with the yogurt incident from the month before. I went quiet. Everyone waited. I took a sip of water and said that Rui seemed more invested in telling it, so he could go ahead. He looked irritated immediately and said no, finish. I said there was no point. Katerina changed the subject because she is kind and could feel the air changing, but later in the car Rui told me I had embarrassed him. I said being interrupted embarrasses me. He said it is not the same because I turn it into a public lesson. I asked what exactly I was supposed to do in public when he keeps doing something I have asked him for years not to do. He said, I should act like an adult and continue speaking. I asked why adulthood only seemed to require self-control from me. We did not resolve anything. He went distant for a few days, then warm again, which is his way of moving past conflict he does not want to unpack. After that lunch, I made the rule everywhere. If I start a story and Rui interrupts, I stop. Not with a scene. Not with raised volume. I just stop. If he asks why I say some version of the same thing, you took it, you finish it. Or, it seems like you had a better version. Or, never mind, it was not important. The wording varies, but the action stays the same. If other people are there, I do not explain unless they ask directly. If we are alone, I remind him that I have asked for years to be allowed to finish my own thoughts. This has had two effects. The first is that Rui is furious. The second is that for the first time, people are noticing what he does. That second effect is the part I think he hates most. When I used to push through the interruptions, social situations still looked smooth from the outside. A friend might notice once or twice, but the conversation kept flowing, and Rui could go on believing he was only participating energetically. Now there is a silence each time. Now his interruption lands in open space and has to sit there, visible. Now people see that I was speaking, he cut in, and the story died. A month ago we had dinner at Rui's parents' flat in Braga. Marta was there with her husband, and Teresa had made too much food as usual, and for about an hour the evening was pleasant. Then Joao asked how the reading festival at the library had gone, because he knows I spend weeks preparing for it every spring. I started telling a story about a boy who had come back 3 days in a row because he wanted the same volunteer to read to him each time, and how the volunteer eventually realized the boy had not come for the story at all. He had come because the volunteer sounded like his grandfather. Before I could get to that part, Rui cut in to explain that the festival was larger than usual this year because the municipality had increased funding. Then he added the number of schools involved, which I had not even mentioned yet. Then he started describing the volunteer system, even though he has never worked a day of it. I stopped. Teresa noticed immediately and said gently that she wanted to hear the rest. I said Rui had it. He did not. He looked annoyed and said that was not what he meant. Joel laughed, in that dismissive male way I know too well, and said women can hold a grudge over anything. Normally, I would have let that pass for the sake of the evening, but something in me was tired beyond politeness. I said maybe, but at least when I speak, I would like the chance to hear how the sentence ends. The table went quiet. Rui went red. Later that night, he said I had made him look like some controlling husband in front of his parents. I said I did not make him do anything. He said I was being cruel over a conversation style difference. I asked if he had considered being interrupted over and over to be cruel. He said I was twisting everything. The thing is, I do not actually think Rui is a monster. If I did, this would be easier. Monsters give you moral clarity. Rui is loving in real ways. He is a devoted father. He cooks half our meals. He calls my mother to help when her internet fails. When I had pneumonia 2 winters ago, he slept on the sofa beside our bed because my coughing frightened him. He has sat through school plays, library fundraisers, and endless family lunches without complaint. He is not careless with the big things. He is careless with 1,000 small things that all land in the same place. I started wondering where the habit came from, because by then we were so stuck in accusation and defense that curiosity felt like the only route left. One night after Leonard was asleep, I asked him if he realized how often Joel interrupts Teresa. Rui said that is just how his father talks. I asked whether Teresa likes it. He shrugged and said she does not seem bothered. I told him she often stops mid-thought when Joel jumps in. He said maybe because she is done. That answer told me more than he meant it to. He genuinely does not always see a half-finished thought as something complete in itself. If a conversation can be made faster, sharper, more efficient, he thinks that is an improvement. He hears structure where I hear intrusion. I told him then that when he interrupts me, I do not feel engaged with. I feel managed. That word got through to him for a second. He looked hurt, then thoughtful. He said he was not trying to manage me. I said intention is not magic. If I step on your foot without meaning to, your foot still hurts. He laughed at the comparison, but less dismissively than before. For about a week after that talk, he improved again. He would physically lean back when I started talking, as if trying not to spring forward. Once or twice he even caught himself and gestured for me to continue. I saw the effort and appreciated it. But effort that feels like performance can be hard to trust, and once he relaxed, the old rhythm returned. What happened this weekend is why I am writing this at all. On Saturday, we had 6 people over for dinner in our flat in Porto. Katerina and Miguel came along with Eva, my colleague Thomas from the library, and Rui's friend Diogo. It was one of those mixed groups that works surprisingly well when the wine is decent and nobody is trying too hard. Leonor had been at a birthday party in the afternoon and came home exhausted and sticky from cake, so after dinner she fell asleep early on the sofa, and I carried her to bed. When I came back, Thomas asked me about a child at the library who had written his own ending to a folk tale during one of our workshops. I started describing it. It was a lovely little story about a fisherman who does not want treasure, only one more season with his brother, and it had made half the room quiet when the boy read it aloud. I was halfway through explaining why it had affected me when Rui interrupted to say the more important context was that this boy had behavioral issues at school and rarely sat still, which was true but not the point I was making. I kept going. Then Rui interrupted again to explain that I had been talking about this child all week because I always get too attached to the sensitive ones. I stopped for a second, then continued, trying very hard to keep the tone light. Then he interrupted a third time to say the reason I found the story moving was probably because my brother had moved to Hamburg last year, and I was projecting sibling nostalgia onto it. Something in the room shifted. Even Rui seemed to hear himself only after the last sentence was already out. I put down my glass and said very calmly that I was done. Thomas asked if I was all right. I said yes, I just was not going to compete for my own story in my own home. No one said anything for a few seconds. Then Katerina, very softly, asked Rui to let me finish. I looked at him waiting. He said he was only adding context. I said context is what a person gives while telling a story. It is not what gets put over her voice like a lid. I know that line sounds rehearsed. It was not. I was just tired enough for the truth to come out clean. The evening limped on after that. People stayed another hour out of politeness, but the warmth had gone. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, Rui asked me what exactly I thought I was doing. I said I was protecting the little bit of self-respect I still had in conversations with him. He said I had humiliated him in front of my colleague and our friends. I said then maybe he should sit with the humiliation of being seen. He said that was cruel. I said maybe, but less cruel than years of being cut off, and then told it was harmless. He slept in the guest room. Yesterday morning, he acted coldly polite, which is his most punishing mode because it makes the whole house feel like an office. He took Leonor to the park, came back, and eventually told me that Katerina had messaged him saying she thought he owed me an apology. He was angrier about that than about the argument itself. He said I had turned our private marital dynamic into a public spectacle. I said it stopped being private when it kept happening in public. He said I could have talked to him differently. I reminded him that I had for years. Then came the part that has me questioning myself. He said he does interrupt, yes, but my new rule is manipulative because I am using silence as a weapon. He said refusing to finish stories is passive-aggressive and juvenile. He said a normal person would either keep talking or address it later, not create these tense little scenes that force everyone to judge him. He said I have become more interested in proving a point than in having a functional marriage. I told him the silence only exists because he entered it first. I told him I am not refusing to talk to punish him. I am refusing to perform a conversation where I get trimmed into shape while pretending not to mind. He said that is dramatic. I said maybe I sound dramatic because I waited too long to stop being polite. We have barely spoken since. What complicates all of this is that Leonor has started copying him. Not often, but enough. Last week I was telling her about a woman in the market who had given me extra clementines because I helped carry her trolley down a step, and Leonor jumped in halfway through to say she knew the woman had white shoes and smelled like soap. She had not even been there. She was just mimicking the rhythm she sees. I looked at Ruai and he looked away. That moment frightened me more than any dinner table embarrassment ever could. I do not want our daughter learning that the strongest voice owns the story, or that women should either talk faster or stop trying. I have also had to ask myself uncomfortable questions about why this particular issue gets under my skin so deeply. Some of it is simple exhaustion, but some of it is older. My father used to interrupt my mother so consistently that family memories themselves became his property. If she began telling a story about their early years, he would correct, embellish, and finally overwrite until the finished version sounded authored by him. My mother became quieter as I got older. She did not stop thinking interesting things. She stopped offering them into rooms where they would be handled carelessly. I swore when I was young that I would never become that woman, grateful for scraps of listening. Maybe that is why I feel so fierce about something other people see as conversational mess. I know where it can lead. Not always to cruelty, not always to domination in every area, but to a steady erosion of voice. And once you start feeling grateful just to be allowed to complete a thought, something in the relationship has already gone wrong. At the same time, I do not want to turn into someone who uses rigid little punishments instead of real communication. That is the part I keep going back and forth on. Is my stopping cruel, or is it simply the only boundary I have found that makes the pattern visible? If I argue every time, I become shrill and the night becomes about my tone. If I say nothing, I go home feeling erased. If I wait and discuss it later, I get told I am collecting grievances. If I keep talking over him, I become someone I do not want to be and usually lose my own train of thought anyway. Silence is the only response that does not require me to fight for air in the moment. But because silence is visible, it also exposes him. And I know exposure feels like punishment even when it is only the natural shape of cause and effect. Last night, after Linner was asleep, Rui came into the kitchen while I was putting dishes away and said something that stayed with me. He said he feels like whatever he does now is wrong, because if he says nothing, he has to police himself and conversation feels stiff, but if he relaxes, I freeze him out. I asked whether he hears himself. He is describing the discomfort of being asked to notice my existence while I am describing years of being unable to complete a story. He said that was unfair. He said he knows I exist very well. He loves me. He listens to me more than anyone else does. He knows my moods before I speak. He said the idea that he is somehow silencing me is insulting. I believed him when he said he loves me. I even believe he thinks he listens. But love and listening are not identical, and being known is not the same as being given space. I told him something I had not said before. I said the reason I stop when he interrupts is not only anger, it is grief. The second he takes over, I no longer want to hand him the rest of the story because it feels contaminated. The moment is gone. The shape of what I was trying to say has been bent. I do not want to salvage it under those conditions. I would rather let it die than offer him the performance of my patience. He got very quiet after that. Then he asked whether I even liked talking to him anymore. That question hurt because the answer is complicated. I love talking to the version of him who is curious and present and funny. I hate talking to the version of him who seems to hear every pause as an opportunity to improve me. I did not answer for a long time. Finally, I said I do like talking to him when it feels like talking, not managing. He looked tired then in a way I recognized from early parenthood, that hollow face of someone suddenly unsure of himself in a role he thought he understood. He said he never knew it was this bad for me. I almost laughed because that sentence appears every time we reach the edge of truth. Still, I said that maybe now he does. This morning he apologized, not perfectly, not with full understanding, but more seriously than before. He said he sees now that the habit is real, that other people clearly see it too, and that he hates the idea that Leonor is learning it from him. He also said he still thinks my method is harsh. I told him harsh does not always mean wrong. Sometimes harsh is what a soft boundary becomes after being ignored too long. He asked what I want going forward. I said I want to be able to finish speaking in my own home. I want him to catch himself before stepping in. I want him not to treat my stories like rough drafts for his improvements. I want him, when he does interrupt, to apologize in the moment instead of arguing about my reaction. I want Leonor to grow up seeing two parents who can leave space for each other. And yes, until I trust the pattern has changed, if he interrupts me, I will probably still stop, not because I enjoy it, because I cannot keep forcing myself through the same injury while pretending it is normal. He said that sounds like a threat. I said it is only a description of what happens when I feel shut down. I do not know if he believes me. So now I am here, wondering whether I have become unfair in my attempt to be heard. Part of me thinks the rule is the only reason this issue finally became real to him. Another part of me worries I have moved from setting a boundary into staging a lesson, and I do not want marriage to become a classroom where we grade each other's failures. But I also know that when I imagine giving up the rule and going back to smiling through each interruption, I feel tired in my bones. I do not want to win against my husband. I want to stop disappearing in conversations with him. Story 5. I broke up with my girlfriend the same night she asked to open the relationship, and now everyone around me is acting like I ruined something worth saving. I thought the breakup would be the hard part. I was wrong. The hard part has been watching people take the most painful conversation of my life and slowly retell it until I sound like the selfish one for leaving. I am Metage, I am 20, and until 3 weeks ago I was with my girlfriend Nika, who is 21. We live in Ljubljana, or at least we did in the sense that we spent most of our time there between university, work, and the strange half-grown life people our age build while pretending they know what they are doing. We were together for almost 2 years, which I know is not a long relationship in the grand scheme of adult life, but when you are 20, 2 years does not feel small. 2 years is long enough to become someone's routine. It is long enough to know how they sound when they are trying not to cry, how they hold a cup when they are anxious, what food they order when they are tired, how they breathe when they are nearly asleep beside you. It is long enough to start making stupid little future plans without even calling them plans. If you had asked me a month ago where we were headed, I would have said probably toward a serious adult relationship, just at the slower pace that makes sense when both people are still finishing degrees and trying to keep their finances from collapsing. I study architecture. Nika studies communications. I also work part-time in a sports shop near the center. She works evenings at a wine bar 3 streets away from the river. We were not living together officially, but in practice we kind of were. I had a student room in a flat with 2 other guys. She had a place with her friend Taja, but most nights one of us was at the other place anyway. My toothbrush had been in her bathroom for over a year. She kept spare socks of mine in a drawer. I had helped her put together a terrible second-hand desk she found online. She had dragged me through Christmas markets in the cold and laughed at how seriously I took mulled wine. We were woven into each other's everyday life in a way that felt normal and safe. That is part of why this hit me so hard. It did not happen in the middle of chaos. It happened in what I thought was stability. I should probably say something honest about us before the breakup, because I do not want to tell the version that makes me look like a saint and her like a villain with no context. Nika is not evil. She is not one of those cartoon people who wake up looking for ways to ruin someone. She is smart, funny, very social, and the kind of person who remembers details about strangers and somehow makes them feel seen. She can walk into a room where nobody knows each other, and by the end of the night she has connected everyone in a way that makes it seem easy. I liked that about her from the beginning. I am quieter. Not antisocial, but more deliberate. I do not need big groups or constant movement. She used to say I made her feel steady. I used to say she made me feel less afraid of life. That was true for a long time. The problems between us were not dramatic at first. They were the kind people dismiss because they do not look dangerous while they are still small. She needed more novelty than I did. More attention, more social stimulation, more spontaneity. I like plans. I like knowing what the evening is going to be. I like being able to picture the week ahead. Nika could make a plan at noon and want a different one by 7. I thought we balanced each other. Sometimes we did. Sometimes it meant I calmed her down, and sometimes it meant she got me out of my own head. But sometimes it also meant if I felt like the boring, stable object, she returned to between more exciting possibilities. I did not have that wording at the time. I only had the feeling. There were little moments over the last several months that I ignored because I did not want to be insecure. She became more interested in going out without me, which on its own is fine. I am not one of those people who thinks being in a relationship means you share oxygen. But there was a change in tone. At the beginning of our relationship, if she went out with friends, she would send me things as the night went on, not because I asked, but because she wanted to keep me included. A ridiculous photo of a cocktail, a message about some man in a linen shirt embarrassing himself, a complaint about the music. Later, that stopped. Then when I asked how the night was, her answers got shorter. Fine, busy, home late, sleeping now. Again, none of this is proof of anything. People get comfortable. People communicate less intensely after the first year. That is normal. The problem is that other things changed too. She started talking more abstractly about freedom. Not in a direct way. More in the way people circle an idea before admitting it is theirs. We would watch a film where a couple had some arrangement, and she would say that conventional relationships seem very restrictive sometimes. Or we would be at a party, and she would mention someone she knew from a seminar who had been in an open relationship for years, and apparently they were happier than most married people. The first few times, I did not think much of it. People say things. Not every topic is a confession in disguise. I remember once laughing and saying that sounded exhausting. She asked why. I said because one relationship is already enough emotional administration for me. I cannot imagine adding staff. She laughed. At the time, it felt harmless. Now I replay all those conversations and wonder whether she had already started moving away from us while I was still standing still. There was one incident in February that I brushed off, and maybe I should not have. Nika works with a lot of older tourists, university people, office workers, and the general after-work crowd, so she gets hit on constantly. Most of the time she handled it with a kind of amused politeness. One night I was at the bar waiting for her shift to end, and I saw her leaning across the counter talking to a guy I did not know. He was maybe 25 or 26, dark hair, expensive coat, the type who looks permanently aware of how he is being seen. I noticed them because the conversation had a different energy than her usual work smile, not scandalous. Just warm in a way that made me feel suddenly unnecessary standing there. When she saw me, she came over, kissed me, and introduced him as Ivo, someone who had come in a few times and was connected to an events company. She said he had offered her occasional promotional work. I nodded, shook his hand, and told myself not to become a suspicious boyfriend based on a tone. Later that night, I asked if he was flirting with her. She said probably a little, but that people flirt all the time and it means nothing. I asked if she liked it. She said everyone likes being liked. I remember that answer because it was so clean and confident that I felt childish for disliking it. Looking back, a lot of what happened in the end depends on the fact that Nika likes being liked in a way I do not think I fully understood until it became stronger than what we had. About a month before the breakup, she became weirdly attentive for a while, more affectionate, more present, more interested in making plans with me. We took a day trip to Bled. We walked around the lake in cold wind and ate cream cake that was too expensive and not even that good. She held my arm the whole afternoon. At one point, she asked whether I could imagine us living abroad for a year after graduation. I said maybe, if it made sense financially. She smiled and said that was the most maid-age answer possible, and then she leaned against me like she was happy. That day has been bothering me ever since, because now I cannot tell whether she was trying to reconnect or quietly saying goodbye to the version of us she had already outgrown. A week later, things shifted again. She became distracted around me. She would be physically present but mentally somewhere else. She started taking longer to answer messages and then over-explaining when she did. She had more late shifts, more team drinks, more spontaneous detours after class. If I asked whether everything was fine, she would say yes and kiss my cheek like I was worrying over nothing. The more she reassured me, the more I felt something under the floorboards moving. I finally asked directly one Sunday evening when we were in her room and she was folding laundry in that restless, uneven way she has when she is preoccupied. I asked if she still wanted this relationship. She looked up almost too fast and said of course she did. I asked if something had changed. She sat on the bed beside me and said she had been thinking a lot about life, youth, identity, all the vague categories people use when they want to sound reflective while avoiding the actual issue. Then she said she loved me, but sometimes she worried that we had become too settled too young. I asked what that meant. She said she did not know exactly. She said maybe she had never really had a period of exploring herself outside a relationship. She had gone from one school crush to another, then a serious relationship at 18, then me after a few months single. She said she did not regret us, but she wondered whether choosing one person so early in life could mean missing some important part of becoming yourself. I remember being strangely calm in that moment, not because I was comfortable, but because I could feel something serious approaching and my whole body went still. I asked if she was saying she wanted to break up. She said no, not exactly. That phrase, not exactly, made me feel colder than if she had simply said yes. Then she said she had been reading a lot and talking to people, and she did not think monogamy worked naturally for everyone. She said maybe there were ways to build a relationship that were more honest than pretending one person could meet every emotional and physical need forever. I asked whether this was theoretical. She looked at me for maybe 3 seconds too long before answering. Then she said it was partly theoretical and partly not. I did not even need the rest, but she gave it anyway. She said she had developed a crush on someone, and instead of hiding it and letting it become a secret, she wanted to be honest with me. She said she had not done anything physical. She said she had thought about what it meant and realized maybe what she wanted was not to lose me, but also not to feel trapped inside a version of commitment that no longer felt true to who she was becoming. I asked who it was. She said that should not matter yet. That answer told me everything. I asked if it was Ivo from the bar. She did not say yes. She did not say no either. She just looked exhausted, which for some reason made me angrier than an outright denial would have. Exhaustion is what people wear when they are tired of resisting themselves. Then came the actual proposal. She said, what if we opened the relationship in a careful, honest way? She said she was not talking about replacing me or downgrading what we had. She said maybe it could be mostly physical, with rules, with communication, with us staying emotionally primary. She said maybe it would relieve pressure and allow both of us to be more truthful, rather than pretending temptation does not exist. She said she had done a lot of thinking and she genuinely believed that what destroys relationships is not desire, but secrecy. It is funny what the mind focuses on in moments like that. I do not remember every sentence. I do remember staring at the sleeve of her jumper because one thread was loose near the cuff. I remember hearing a scooter outside. I remember thinking that she sounded like someone pitching a new study schedule or travel plan, not like someone quietly taking a knife to the center of what I thought we were. I asked her if she wanted to sleep with someone else. She said she wanted the freedom to explore without losing the relationship that mattered most to her. I asked again, more plainly. She said yes, but it did not have to mean less love for me. That was the exact second something in me stepped back. I know some people are capable of hearing that kind of proposal and treating it as a logistical or philosophical conversation. I am not one of them. For me, monogamy was not some outdated social default I had lazily drifted into. It was the structure of the promise itself. It was not about ownership or paranoia. It was about the simple idea that if we are together, then this is the place where desire gets metabolized into choice. You notice other people, sure, you are human, but you do not turn that noticing into a plan that your partner must emotionally supervise. I told her I could not do that. She said I did not have to answer immediately. I told her I already had. She started crying then, softly at first, and said this was exactly why people hide things, because the moment they try to be honest, everything gets punished. She said she had come to me before doing anything because she respected me. She said it was unfair that she was being treated like a cheater for having feelings and wanting a conversation. I said maybe it would have been a conversation if she had come to me saying she was struggling or confused or scared about her feelings. But this did not feel like a neutral conversation. It felt like she had already walked halfway toward another person and now wanted my permission to finish the journey without consequences. She said that was not fair. I said fairness stopped the moment she wanted to keep me while exploring someone else. She said love should be bigger than fear. I said maybe, but self-respect should be bigger than desperation. That was harsher than I intended, but once it came out, I knew it was true. I do not mean that people in open relationships are desperate. I mean that agreeing to one in that exact moment, under that exact pressure, for that exact reason, would have required me to accept terms I did not want simply to keep someone who was already looking over my shoulder. She asked whether I was really going to throw away 2 years because she was trying to be honest. I said no, I was ending 2 years because the relationship she wanted was not the one I had agreed to be in. Then I stood up, collected my coat, and left. I walked all the way back to my flat instead of taking the bus. It was cold and late, and I could not feel my hands by the time I got home. My roommate Jur was in the kitchen making pasta and asked whether I had lost something. I said yes, probably. He took one look at my face and stopped asking stupid questions. We sat at the table until almost 2 in the morning while I told him everything. He did not interrupt much, which I appreciated. When I finished, he said something that stayed with me. He said people act like honesty erases timing, but it does not. Saying I want to keep you while I test whether I prefer someone else is still a brutal thing to hear, even if it is delivered politely. The next morning, Nika sent me a long message. She said she had panicked when she saw how final I sounded. She said maybe she had worded it terribly. She said she was not asking because I was not enough. She said she was asking because she did not want to lie to either of us about the fact that love and attraction are complex. She said if opening the relationship was too much for me, she understood, but she wanted to keep talking because she did not want one difficult conversation to end us. I read it 5 times. Then I replied that for me, the conversation itself had changed the relationship in a way I did not think I could undo. I said I did not hate her, but I was not interested in negotiating myself into a form I did not want. I said I needed distance. For about 12 hours, it was just sad. Then other people got involved. First, it was our mutual friend Sarah. She messaged asking if everything was okay because Nika had been crying at her place. I kept the answer minimal and said we had broken up after a serious disagreement about what kind of relationship we wanted. Sarah asked if Nika had cheated. I said not physically, as far as I knew. I should have kept my mouth shut there, but I was too tired to be strategic. I added that Nika had asked to open the relationship because she wanted freedom to explore feelings for someone else. Sarah read that and did not respond for nearly an hour. Then she came back with a message that honestly felt like the beginning of the insanity. She said she understood why I was hurt, but at least Nika had been mature enough to bring it up instead of sneaking around. She said a lot of people our age are figuring themselves out and I should maybe take a week before making permanent decisions. I stared at the screen thinking I had somehow misread my own life. Within the next 2 days, the story spread in fragments. Not the full version, of course. Nobody ever hears the full version once a breakup passes through multiple hands. By the time it reached most people, it had become something like this. Nika bravely admitted she had doubts about monogamy, Matage reacted rigidly, and now he is throwing away a loving relationship because he is immature and possessive. In some versions, she had merely asked a philosophical question and I broke up with her on the spot. In others, I had refused even to hear her out. In one especially absurd retelling I heard later from Jur, I was apparently offended by the concept of open relationships in general and made it into some moral issue because I am conservative. I am not conservative. I am just monogamous and not interested in being a practice run. The worst part was hearing from people who knew us both, but somehow decided that because Nika had expressed herself in emotionally literate language, her position must be the more evolved one. My cousin Aljaz called me and said I should not be so dramatic because at 20, nobody knows what they want long-term anyway. He said if I really loved her, I would at least listen instead of making everything black and white. I asked whether he would say the same thing if his girlfriend told him she wanted to sleep with a specific guy from work, but still keep him as her emotional home base. He paused, then said it depends how it is framed. That phrase alone made me want to throw my phone into the Lujubjanica. Then my sister Manka got involved, which was the first time I started wondering whether I was living in some social experiment designed to test how much reality could be bent by wording. Manka is 24 and generally more grounded than most people in our family. She met Nika for coffee, then called me saying I needed to think carefully before doing something stubborn. She said Nika was devastated, that she loved me, that she had only brought it up because she trusted me enough to be real. I asked whether Nika had mentioned the part where there was already someone else in mind. Manka said she had mentioned a crush, yes, but crushes happen. I said exactly, crushes happen. Adults manage them without applying pressure to the person they supposedly love most. Manka sighed and said I was reducing a complicated emotional issue to loyalty language because it is easier than dealing with ambiguity. Maybe that is true in some situations. Not in this one. Around this time, Nika asked if we could meet in person. I did not want to, but I also did not want the entire breakup to happen through messages filtered by everyone else. We met at a small cafe near Tivoli Park, where we had gone many times before. It was raining lightly, and the whole meeting had that washed out feeling of two people sitting in a place that still remembers their old selves. She looked exhausted. I am not saying that to manipulate sympathy. She genuinely looked wrecked. When she sat down, she said, "Thank you for coming," as if I was doing something formal and charitable. For a few minutes, we talked around the edges. Classes, sleep, the stupid weather. Then she said she needed me to understand that she had not wanted to leave me. She had wanted to make the relationship more truthful. I said the truth was that she wanted another man and did not want to lose the security of me while she explored it. She said it was not about security, it was about love not fitting old formulas. I asked whether she had already imagined kissing him. She said yes. I asked whether she had thought about sleeping with him. She was quiet for a second and then said yes, but thinking is not doing. I said asking your boyfriend to emotionally bless the thought is doing quite a lot, actually. She closed her eyes then like I was being unfairly sharp. Then she said she had maybe gotten carried away with language and theory, and she now saw that bringing up opening the relationship before explaining the emotional confusion underneath it had been a mistake. She said what she had really wanted was space to talk about the fact that she was scared of committing too young and also scared of losing me. That would have mattered more if it had come before the proposal instead of after the breakup. Once someone tells you the version of love they want might include you staying steady while they sample other futures, it is very hard to retranslate that into innocent confusion. I asked her again if the crush was Ivo. She said yes. Oddly, hearing the name out loud gave me relief, not because it hurt less, because it ended the fog. I no longer had to pretend this was purely conceptual. It was specific. There was a man. He existed in her real world. He had a face, a job, a stupid expensive coat, and some kind of gravitational pull strong enough to make my girlfriend reframe our entire relationship model. I asked whether anything physical had happened. She said no, but they had talked outside work. Not often, she added quickly. A few messages. Once after her shift, he had walked her to the bus stop. Once they had coffee during the day because he was nearby. She insisted it had not crossed a line because nothing physical had happened, and because she came to me before letting it go further. I remember sitting there with my coffee going cold and thinking how differently people define lines when they want moral credit for stopping just before the edge. If I had been privately messaging some girl, meeting her for coffee, imagining sleeping with her, then asking Nika whether she would consider opening the relationship so I could explore honestly, she would have called that emotional cheating before I finished the sentence. I am sure of it. But because she got there first and used the vocabulary of honesty and growth, suddenly I was the rigid one. I told her that whether or not she had physically cheated, she had been building intimacy with another man while still leaning on me as her partner. I said the request to open things was not brave honesty to me. It felt like the final administrative step after most of the emotional movement had already happened. She started crying then, properly this time, not just with tears in her eyes but with that low, embarrassed kind of crying people do when they still want to seem composed. She said she knew she had handled it badly. She said she had been selfish. She said she hated the thought that I now saw her as disloyal or shallow. She said I mattered more than Ivo ever could. She said the crush was partly about novelty ego, feeling seen in a different way. She said it had made her confront things in herself she was ashamed of. She said she had hoped we were strong enough to survive an honest conversation about it. I asked her a question I had not planned to ask. I asked if I had said yes, would she have slept with him? She did not answer immediately, and then she said probably. There are some moments when pain becomes so clear that it almost feels clean. That answer did that for me. It hurt, but it also removed the remaining fantasy that maybe this was all just intellectual restlessness. No. She wanted a real thing with a real person. Maybe not a full relationship, maybe not love, but enough of a thing that if I had stayed seated at the negotiation table, I would have been authorizing the opening act. I told her that was why I could not come back. Not because I think she is disgusting or because I want to punish her. Because I would never again feel like I was chosen freely. I would feel like the stable option she kept while testing whether excitement tasted better elsewhere. She said that was not fair because she was still choosing me. I said if that were true, I would not be sitting here. We left separately. I walked through Tivoli in the rain and felt something settle in me, not peace, but form. The breakup stopped feeling like an impulsive reaction and started feeling like the only way I knew to keep my own boundaries from dissolving under pressure from people who were not going to live with the consequences. That should have been the end of it. It was not. A few days later, Nika's friend Taja messaged me. Taja and I have always been civil, never close, but she is the sort of person who believes she can rescue any emotional situation by explaining everyone to each other. She said she knew it was not her place, but she wanted me to know Nika had been having a hard time for months and felt trapped between loving me and fearing the kind of life that starts narrowing too early. She said Nika never wanted to disrespect me. She said I should maybe see this as a crisis of identity, not betrayal. I replied more sharply than I probably should have. I said identity crises do not obligate your partner to remain available while you workshop alternate romantic structures around your crush. Taja left me on read. My parents were better, but not entirely. My mother, Kaja, said she understood why I ended it, though she also asked whether there was any path back if Nika admitted she had made a mistake and chose monogamy after all. My father, Borot, who usually says little, surprised me by being more direct. He asked one question. If she had not asked to open it, do you think she would have stayed faithful? I said I honestly did not know. He nodded and said, then you already have your answer. That helped more than anything else anyone said. Still, the social pressure kept building in weird little ways. Friends would frame it as concern. Family would frame it as perspective. Even strangers at the edges of our circles somehow had opinions. Jan from one of my design studios, who barely knows me, heard a version through somebody else and told me over coffee that exclusivity is a pretty outdated metric for commitment anyway. I asked if he had ever been in a long-term relationship. He said no, but he had read a lot. That about finished me. What really got under my skin was the way people kept acting as if because Nika had not physically cheated, I was overreacting by treating the proposal itself as a breaking point. But to me, the proposal was not some abstract suggestion disconnected from reality. It emerged from a real emotional drift toward a real person. It asked me to absorb not only her desire, but her timing, her guilt, her philosophical reframing, and my own replacement anxiety all at once. Then when I said no, suddenly I was not being open-minded enough. There is another part to this that I have barely admitted out loud because it makes me feel childish. But it matters. I was humiliated. Not only hurt, humiliated. I felt like the dependable boyfriend in a story where dependable is just another word for boring. She did not come to me and say our relationship was struggling and we needed to repair it. She came to me and said she wanted to keep what we had while also opening the door for someone new who made her feel more alive in some way. Whether she intended it or not, what I heard was that I was home, not hunger, safety, not spark. I do not think any amount of relationship theory would let me hear that and still walk away with my dignity intact if I agreed. Jor, to his credit, kept me sane during the worst of the outside noise. One night we sat on the balcony outside our flat in Ljubljana with cheap beer and traffic noise below us, and I told him I felt like I was being socially bullied into doubting something that had seemed obvious in my bones. He said that happens when people confuse calm language with harmless content. He said if someone says, I want to keep your role while redistributing your exclusivity, it does not become less brutal because they say it in therapy vocabulary. Then he said something else I have been thinking about ever since. He said there are people who want freedom, and there are people who want freedom without loss. The second group is usually the one causing collateral damage. That line described Nika better than anything else. I do think she wanted freedom without loss. I think she wanted emotional honesty without the cost honesty sometimes brings. I think she wanted me to admire her transparency while ignoring the fact that transparency had arrived after private fantasies, growing attachment, and at least some quiet emotional intimacy with someone else. A week after our cafe meeting, Nika sent another message. This one was shorter. She said she had cut contact with Ivo and that she wanted me to know she had been thinking about everything differently. She said maybe she had confused restlessness with truth. She said if there was any part of me still willing to talk about rebuilding, she would do things properly this time. No experiments, no theory, no other people, just us. That message messed me up more than I expected. Not because it changed my decision, but because it hit the oldest weak point in me, which is the desire to believe someone when they finally say the exact thing that would make the pain easier. If she had sent that message the morning after the breakup, I might have cracked. Not because I had changed my values, but because love makes people temporarily stupid when relief appears in familiar handwriting. I did not reply right away. I showed the message to Jor. He read it and said the obvious question is not whether she means it now. The question is whether you would ever forget why she said it. That stopped me. Because the truth is, even if I got back with her, and even if she never mentioned opening the relationship again, I would spend months wondering whether monogamy was now a concession she resented rather than a choice she believed in. I would wonder whether I had won some contest against a man named Ivo instead of being loved freely. I would wonder whether the next time she felt restless, she would frame it differently but head toward the same conclusion. So I replied carefully. I said I appreciated the honesty, but I was not willing to rebuild something whose foundation no longer felt shared. I said I hoped she figured out what she really wanted, but I did not want to be part of that process anymore. She sent back only that she was sorry. You would think after that people would let it die. Instead, the pressure got quieter and more manipulative. Sarah told me I was being proud. Manka told me heartbreak can make people say strange things, and I might regret throwing away someone who genuinely loved me. Even Aljaz, who is usually unserious about everything, said I should at least consider whether my reaction was partly ego. I told him of course it was partly ego. People say ego like it is always the enemy, but sometimes ego is just the part of you that still recognizes humiliation when it enters the room. What I have been wrestling with most is not whether I made the right choice in theory. I still think I did. What I wrestle with is whether I needed to make it so immediately final. There are moments, especially late at night or when I pass places we used to go, when I remember the good parts so vividly that the whole breakup feels impossible. Nika asleep with one hand tucked under her face. Nika making pasta badly and pretending she meant it to taste like that. Nika in Koper last summer with salt in her hair and sunglasses too big for her face. Nika reading my project drafts, even when she did not understand the technical parts, just because she knew I liked being looked at while I worked. Those memories are real. They do not become fake because the ending was ugly. And sometimes I think maybe the people telling me to get back with her are responding not to the logic of what happened, but to the visible fact that she still loves me in some way and is miserable now. Then I remember something else. I remember that when she asked to open the relationship, she was not offering me a mutual exploration. She was solving a problem created by her own attraction to someone specific. The timing matters. The sequence matters. If two people in a healthy long-term relationship mutually decide to question monogamy, that is one thing. If one person develops feelings elsewhere and then asks to redesign the agreement around those feelings, that is another. To me, that second version is not enlightened. It is personalized pressure. There was one final conversation that settled it for me more than anything. It was with my grandmother Elzbieta, who lives in Maribor and has the rare talent of saying simple things without sounding simplistic. I had gone there for Sunday lunch because my mother told her some version of the breakup, and apparently all family information eventually reaches her no matter what anyone wants. After we ate, she asked me to walk with her to the bakery. On the way, she said I looked older in the face. I told her I felt stupid for still being upset when the relationship had ended quickly and cleanly compared to what other people go through. She said clean is not the same as easy. Then she asked me to explain what exactly Nika wanted. I did. Not the gossip version, not the socially upgraded version, just the plain one. Nika wanted to stay with me while opening the relationship because she had feelings for someone else and felt trapped by monogamy. My grandmother nodded slowly and said this. When someone asks you to help them keep two doors open, you should pay attention to which door they expect to remain patiently unlocked. That sentence hit me so hard I had to stop walking. Because that was exactly it. I was the patient unlocked door. the guaranteed access point, the stable emotional property she assumed would still be there while she tested whether another future excited her more. And once I saw myself that way in the structure of her request, everything became very clear. The last contact we had was 4 days ago. She sent me a message because she had found one of my sketchbooks at her place. She asked if I wanted to pick it up or if she should leave it with Taja. I said she could leave it with Taja. Then after a while she sent one more line saying she still did not think what she felt meant she loved me less, but she understood now that asking me to carry it with her was unfair. I have read that line too many times. Maybe that is the closest I will ever get to the apology I actually needed. Not sorry for feeling a crush. Not sorry for being young and confused. Sorry for asking me to carry confusion that was shaped like my own displacement. I do still love her in the stupid, involuntary way people keep loving someone for a while after reality has already ended the relationship. That is probably why the outside pressure has been so dangerous. If I felt nothing, their opinions would bounce off. But because I still miss her, every message telling me to reconsider lands on a bruise. Still, I have not gone back. And unless I become someone I do not recognize, I will not. I do not think Nika is wicked. I think she is young, restless, flattering herself with the idea of radical honesty while underestimating how cruel certain truths become when offered as proposals instead of confessions. I think she wanted to believe she was being brave, because bravery sounds better than disloyalty. I think she may even sincerely regret it now that she has lost me, and whatever fantasy she attached to Ivo has probably already faded under the weight of real consequences. But regret after loss is not the same thing as clarity before action, and I cannot build trust out of someone realizing my value only after testing how replaceable I might be. So now I am living in that ugly stage after a breakup where the world keeps offering me interpretations I did not ask for. Maybe I am rigid. Maybe I am proud. Maybe I am too young to understand complexity. Or maybe I understood one thing very clearly, and that clarity is what people around me find inconvenient. I do not want a relationship where my role is to stay loving while my partner explores whether someone else feels more electric. I do not want to be praised for maturity because I tolerated the beginning of my own replacement process in good faith language. And I do not think refusing that makes me backward. I think it means I still know where my line is. Story 6. I lied to my family about how much money I have. I did not lie because I wanted to feel rich. I lied because in my family, the moment one person looked safe, everyone else started treating that safety like shared property. This reads closest to a true off my chest post, because I am not really asking for a ruling as much as I am trying to put something into words that has been sitting in me for years. My name is Elivka Novkov. I am 34. I grew up in Brno, and for the last 8 years I have lived in Ghent. If someone met me through work, they would probably describe me as composed, practical, and slightly too careful. I work in financial operations for a health technology company. My apartment is small but warm with tall windows, secondhand oak shelves, and a kitchen table. I carried up 3 flights of stairs because I refused to pay extra for delivery. I keep my bills sorted by month. I know the interest rate on every account I have. I compare electricity providers once a year, even when I am not planning to switch. People think I was born organized. I was not. I became organized because I grew up in a family where money was never still. It was always rushing in, leaking out, getting renamed, getting promised twice, or being used to calm one emergency while 3 others were already forming. In my childhood home, numbers did not mean certainty. They meant mood. They meant denial. They meant postponement. They meant my mother saying that everything would be all right in a voice so controlled that even as a child I understood it meant the opposite. My father, Roman, had charm in the exhausting old-fashioned way that makes other people forgive him before they even know what he did. He was not a cruel man in the theatrical sense. He did not smash things. He did not rage every night. He was worse in a quieter way. He was hopeful without discipline. He had ideas the way some people have sneezes, suddenly and often. Used cars, restaurant supply, warehouse leasing, imported flooring, tourist apartments, online ticketing, seasonal staffing. He was always one partnership away from stability, one investor away from recovery, one clever turn away from proving that everyone who doubted him had simply lacked imagination. My mother, Lenka, spent most of her life turning his unfinished plans into breathable air for the rest of us. She worked first as a receptionist at a dental clinic, then later at a school office. She tracked grocery discounts the way intelligence officers track movement. She knew which utility could be delayed by 3 days and which one could not. She could stretch leftovers into 3 meals and still make them look intentional. But she also had a dangerous softness where family was concerned. She believed that love meant absorbing strain quietly. She believed that protecting people from shame was more important than protecting herself from exhaustion. That belief made her kind. It also made her complicit. I have a younger brother, Tom, and a younger sister, Clara. Tom is 2 years younger than I am and inherited the least useful parts of both our parents. He got my father's ability to sound convincing and my mother's habit of expecting rescue to arrive from somewhere if he just held out long enough. Clara is 5 years younger than I am and was the only truly careful person in the house besides me. She was a child who folded her clothes without being asked and lined up pencils by size. Even when she was 10, she had the watchful face of someone who already understood that adults were improvising. My grandmother Malada lived in Olamak and remains, even now, the only person in my family who ever treated money as something that should be told the truth. She had survived enough scarcity to stop romanticizing it. She kept cash in envelopes marked food, heating, medicine, roof, and Christmas. She did not have much. That was exactly why she was serious about what she had. When I visited her as a girl, she would let me sit beside her at the table while she checked receipts with a small blue pen and glasses she always cleaned on the corner of her apron. She never told me money was the most important thing. She told me that uncertainty spreads when people refuse to count properly. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything I learned in school. By the time I was 12, I already knew how to pretend I needed less than I did. I did not ask for class trips unless a teacher directly handed me the form and stood there waiting. I learned how to make one pair of winter boots last 2 winters. I started helping neighbors with English homework for pocket money and hid the notes in an old dictionary because if money in our house was visible, it stopped belonging to the person who had earned it. The first time that happened clearly enough for me to understand the rule, I was 15. I had been saving for months because I wanted a second-hand laptop. Nothing fancy, just something that would let me work at home instead of waiting in line for the school computers. My mother knew I was saving. She even praised me for it. Then one evening my father came home with that particular silence he wore when he was already arranging his own innocence. Something had happened with a van he had leased through a friend. There was a payment problem, a penalty, and some story involving insurance that kept changing while he told it. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained, in the soft voice adults use when they are trying to make theft sound like maturity, that families help one another. She said I was old enough to understand that some things matter more than personal purchases. I remember handing over the envelope and feeling, even then, that something invisible was being established. No one said I had to give it. No one threatened me. That is part of why this still knots my thoughts even now. It was always framed as voluntary, as solidarity, as temporary, as what decent people do. But in our house, voluntary only meant that if you refused, you had to live inside the moral weather that followed. I became good at school because school was one of the few places where effort and outcome still had some visible relationship. If I studied, I got marks. If I got marks, I got scholarships. If I got scholarships, I could buy a little distance. I studied economics at Maastricht University in Brno partly because I was good at it and partly because I wanted to understand the machinery that seemed to rule our house without anyone speaking plainly about it. During university, I worked evenings at a hotel reception desk and weekends translating menu descriptions, tourism blurbs, and website copy from Czech into English. It was never enough to feel abundant, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. The problem was that progress, in my family, immediately became visible as available capacity. When I got my first scholarship, my parents congratulated me warmly and then asked whether I could contribute a little toward Tom needing a new phone for school. When I started earning more from the hotel, my mother mentioned that Clara's winter coat was too thin. When I found a paid internship in Prague for one summer, my father had a problem with a supplier and needed a bridge loan for just 2 weeks. I started to understand that any stable surface I built would be walked on almost immediately. Tama was the worst with this, not because he was evil, but because he had never really had to connect action with consequence for very long. He drifted from one half-formed ambition to another. He wanted to be a photographer until he realized equipment cost money. then a bartender, until he learned that late shifts were tiring. Then a fitness coach, then something in event promotion, then something online he could never explain clearly enough to sound legal or sustainable. He always had a reason the last plan failed, and a new reason the next one would be different. My parents oscillated between frustration and hope in a pattern so regular it might as well have been weather. Clara was different. She studied hard, spoke carefully, apologized when she got ill, and acted grateful for scraps in a way that made me ache. When she got into dental school in Pluzzy, I cried in the bathroom at work because I was proud of her and because I knew exactly what would happen next. Her success would be celebrated, but the practical burden of supporting it would be distributed toward whoever looked most able to absorb it. That person was increasingly me. After university, I spent 3 years in Brno working for a regional insurance administrator. I hated the office and loved the salary because it was the first time money entered my account in a pattern that felt adult. I rented a tiny one-room flat with cracked tiles and a radiator that clicked like a nervous insect all night, but it was mine. I bought my own groceries, my own lamp, my own laundry detergent. No one understood how intoxicating that felt to me. Stability is underrated by people who have always had it. Then I got an offer in Belgium. It came through a woman named Sophie who had moved from Antwerp to Prague and back and somehow noticed me during a training session. The company was in Ghent, growing quickly, and needed someone for compliance and payment reconciliation in a multilingual team. The salary was higher than anything I had imagined for myself at that age. I said yes before fear could get too organized. My family reacted as if I had been recruited into royalty. My father told relatives that his daughter had been selected internationally because of her brains. My mother cried in the hallway when I left and packed enough food for a train journey that was only supposed to take a day. Tommy immediately started talking about coming to visit and maybe building some opportunities abroad. Clara hugged me so hard I could feel how tense she was under her winter coat. Moving to Ghent was the first truly adult decision I made that belonged only to me. I arrived with 2 suitcases, one winter scarf too thin for Belgium, and a level of panic I concealed so well that even I almost mistook it for competence. I rented a furnished studio near St. Peter Station with narrow windows and a mattress that bowed in the middle. I counted every euro. I bought vegetables late in the day when they were marked down. I worked too much. I practiced Dutch with cashiers and receptionists and old women in bakeries who corrected me without mercy. My world became smaller and bigger at the same time. The requests from home did not stop. They became more polished. My mother needed help replacing the boiler. My father had tax complications from a business arrangement that had not technically failed but was not liquid yet. Tom had rent trouble in Brno because his flatmate left. Clara needed instruments and books that her program did not fully cover. Then there were the extended family requests, which always arrived wrapped in memory. Aunt Susanna had once watched us when our mother was sick. Could I help with her car repair? My cousin Marek wanted to take a welding course in Ostrava and was such a hard-working boy. Could I contribute something small? It was never one huge demand in those years. It was death by soft recurrence. 200 here, 400 there, one train ticket, one semester deposit, one late bill, one medical expense, one urgent transfer before Monday. Always reasonable when isolated, crushing in aggregate. I kept helping because part of me still believed I could stabilize my family into becoming different people. I thought that if I covered enough rough months, they would eventually stop falling into the same holes. What I did not understand then was that when you keep cushioning impact for people, they often learn to fall with more confidence. Around that time I met Jonas. He was from Leuven originally, worked in municipal planning, and had the kind of face that looked almost severe until he laughed. He had no appetite for drama and no fascination with chaos, which meant that at first I found him almost suspiciously calm. People from difficult families often mistake steadiness for emptiness because they have been trained to expect intensity as proof of depth. Jonas was the first person who showed me that predictability can also be a form of care. He noticed patterns before I was willing to name them. If I got off the phone with my mother and went quiet for an hour, he did not press immediately. He would wait, make tea, ask once, and listen without trying to rescue the whole thing with a slogan. When I explained one of Thomas' latest financial emergencies, Jonas asked whether anyone in my family ever came to me with good news that did not contain an implied invoice. I laughed at the time because I thought he was exaggerating. Later I realized he was not. The year I turned 30, my life changed materially in a way I still do not fully know how to talk about without sounding either ashamed or defensive. The company where I worked was acquired by a larger Swedish group. When I had signed my contract years earlier, there had been a modest employee share option program attached to it. At the time, I barely understood it. I was too focused on salary, rent, health insurance, and surviving in a foreign system to care much about speculative future value. But after the acquisition, those options turned into actual money. After taxes and fees and a long set of meetings with advisors who all spoke with serene faces about sums that made my stomach go tight, I ended up with a little under 580,000 euros. That sentence still looks strange to me, even now. It did not make me a billionaire. It did not make me glamorous. It did not turn me into a different species. What it gave me was something that had never existed in my life before: margin. Protection, the ability to imagine the future without immediately scanning for the nearest financial trap. By then, I had also saved steadily for years. I lived below my means because living below my means felt less like self-denial and more like oxygen. I did not collect expensive habits. I did not care about brands. I liked books, good shoes, quiet restaurants, train travel, and knowing that if the washing machine died, I would not have to build a new moral philosophy around whether I deserved a replacement. So I made decisions. I put a large portion into long-term investments. I kept a reserve fund that could carry me for years if necessary. I made a down payment on a small apartment in Ghent. Later, when interest rates were favorable and I had run the numbers too many times to count, I paid the mortgage down faster than anyone in my family knew. Not entirely at once, but enough that the pressure eased to almost nothing. For the first time in my life, I could look at my bank app and feel quiet instead of adrenaline. I told almost no one. Jonas knew because I was already building a life with him, and secrets of that scale distort intimacy. My friend Sophie knew because she is the kind of person who thinks emotionally charged people should never meet tax law alone. My family did not know. I told them I had received a good payout from the acquisition, but that most of it had gone to taxes, housing costs, and responsible planning. None of that was entirely false, but it was a carefully reduced truth, arranged to create the impression that I was comfortable, not safe, stable, not shielded, doing well, but not so well that I could become the answer to every structural weakness in the family. At first, I called this privacy. Then, gradually, I admitted to myself that it was lying. The lie was not one dramatic statement. It was 1,000 calibrated understatements. I said Ghent was more expensive than it really was. I said my mortgage was still heavy when it had already become light. I said investments were locked up and hard to touch. I said I had to be careful. I made myself sound secure but stretched, just prosperous enough to remain impressive in family stories, not prosperous enough to become communal infrastructure. Why did I do that? Because I knew exactly what would happen if they knew the truth. My father would not ask for yachts or madness. It would be worse than that. He would ask for reasonable things tied to temporary conditions, each one difficult to refuse without looking hard-hearted. Tomo would present his next plan as finally mature and insist that now, when I clearly had the means, refusing him would no longer be prudence but punishment. My mother would start redistributing hope based on what I could absorb. Clara would ask for little, which would make me want to give her more, and I would slowly become the financial center of the family whether I intended to or not. The thing about people who say family shares everything is that they rarely mean power equally. They mean access flows toward whoever is most reliable. For 2 years, the lie worked. I still helped, but on my terms. I covered specific medical costs for my mother when she needed dental surgery. I paid 1 semester of Clara's housing quietly through a bursary arrangement she never fully investigated because I did not want her feeling watched. I gave my parents enough once to repair serious water damage in their flat because mold and denial make a terrible combination. But I refused larger requests by saying I could not stretch further. I did not explain the real reason, which was not inability but refusal to turn my private safety into a public rescue fund. Jonas supported me, though not uncritically. He understood why I hid the scale of my savings, but he also warned me that secrecy has a way of stiffening into identity. He said that if I kept lying long enough, I might forget whether I was protecting a boundary or protecting myself from having to state one openly. I did not want to hear that because he was right. Then came Tommy and the cafe. By then he was 32 and still speaking about adulthood as if it were a delayed shipment. He had moved through nightlife work, digital marketing, fitness instruction, and a short absurd phase where he claimed he was going into luxury property networking despite never having sold anything more expensive than a used camera lens. Then he met a man in Brno named Radek who apparently had hospitality experience and a cousin in Vienna and a concept for a cafe that would blend specialty coffee, vinyl records, and evening wine service. Tomo presented this to the family as the first truly serious venture of his life. The way he described it, it almost sounded plausible. He had spreadsheets. He used terms like margin, supplier agreement, branding, and seasonal cash flow. My father was immediately impressed because Tom was finally speaking in nouns that sounded adult. My mother was relieved because she wanted to believe that all those years of drift had been research for a mature version of him. Clara was cautious. I asked to see the documents. This offended everyone. My father said I always treated family like a risk file. Tom said I was condescending and foreign now. My mother asked whether trust had to be reduced to paperwork. I told them paperwork is where trust either holds or dies. No one liked that. Eventually, I reviewed what Tom would show me, and what I saw was exactly what I feared. There was very little personal capital, too much optimism built into the income projections, weak contractual clarity between Tom and Radek, supplier commitments based on expected volume rather than tested demand. Most importantly, my father was preparing to guarantee part of a loan because Tom had no usable financial history and no collateral. I told them clearly that this was a mistake, not a risk in the healthy adult sense. A mistake. Tommy accused me of wanting him to fail because I had decided long ago that he was incapable. My father said every business carries risk and that no one ever built anything by being afraid of numbers. I nearly laughed at that because fear of numbers had defined his whole life. My mother said that once in a while, people need faith from their family more than criticism. Clara stayed mostly silent, which in our family was often the closest thing to disagreement without escalation. The cafe opened anyway. It was in Brno, on a side street that had good foot traffic in theory and inconsistent loyalty in practice. At first, the family treated it like a resurrection. There were photos of new shelves, brick walls, pendant lights, pastries arranged like sculpture, Tomley in an apron pretending he had always understood inventory. My father glowed. My mother started talking about helping there on weekends. For about 3 months, everyone spoke as if the long, difficult apprenticeship of Tomley's life had finally revealed itself as destiny. Then the cracks appeared. Suppliers were paid late. Radek was not as experienced as advertised. Evening wine service attracted more lingering than spending. The record nights were popular but not profitable. Staff turnover began. Someone mishandled taxes. Equipment maintenance costs appeared like weeds. By winter, the place was surviving only if everyone described survival generously. I got more calls. At first, the requests were small and carefully disguised. Could I help with a short cash gap until an investor conversation concluded? Could I lend something toward a new espresso grinder because the old one had become unreliable? Could I contribute to a heating problem because customers would not stay in a cold room? Each time I said I could not do much and send a smaller amount than they hoped. Each time my refusal was met with disappointment disguised as understanding. Then Radek disappeared from the business in a way no one could explain simply. Then the tax office became involved. Then the landlord wanted arrears addressed. Then one night my mother called me from the kitchen in Brno, speaking so quietly that I knew immediately the problem had outgrown soft language. She told me that the cafe was collapsing, that there were debts she had not realized were personally linked to my father, and that if something was not done soon, it would become far worse. She said the immediate gap was 37,000 euros, and that some of it had to be addressed within days if they wanted to avoid legal escalation. I had more than enough to cover it. I told her I did not. I said I could manage maybe 5,000 without putting myself in a bad position. I spoke about obligations, mortgage pressure, cost of living, future insecurity. It was not fiction exactly. I do believe in protecting my future. I do have obligations. But the core fact remained that I was lying. I could have transferred the full amount the next morning and still been safer than anyone else in my family had ever been. My mother did not shout. She went quiet in the way that made me feel 10 years old again. She said she understood. Then she asked whether Jonas could help. That question changed something in me permanently. Not because I expected my family never to think about the people close to me, but because it revealed that the logic had fully extended. My relationship was now in crisis. Another possible corridor to money. Another room in the same building? I said no in a voice so flat that even she paused. Over the next few weeks, I sent the 5,000. I also paid for a lawyer in Brno to review the contracts and exposure because I trusted law more than family interpretation. I spent hours on the phone explaining to my father that if he wanted help navigating the mess, he needed full transparency. No more fragments, no more emotional summaries. Documents, dates, guarantees. Actual numbers. He responded with wounded dignity. He said he was not my employee. I said I had not asked him to become one. I had asked him to stop asking for trust while withholding facts. Tom, when he called, was even worse. He said I was treating everyone like suspects. He said people who move abroad forget where they came from. He said if I had money for Belgian property and quiet little dinners, I had money to keep the family from being humiliated. What he meant, of course, was that my savings did not feel morally private to him. They felt withheld. The worst part was Clara. By then she had postponed a postgraduate course in Vienna because she thought the family finances were too unstable for anyone to help with additional training. She never blamed me for that. She barely mentioned it. That made it harder. If she had been openly demanding, I could have defended myself more easily. Instead, she simply adjusted downward, the way she always had, and I let her do it while holding more security than she could imagine. The cafe closed in the spring. My father sold a small plot of inherited land near Mikolov to reduce immediate damage. My mother took extra work at the school and some administrative shifts during summer exams. Tom moved back into my parents' flat and spoke of the failure as a consequence of market conditions, partner betrayal, and poor timing, never as the result of chronic irresponsibility plus borrowed confidence. I stayed in Ghent, went to work, paid my bills, watered my plants, and carried a guilt so constant that it became almost background noise. At the same time, and this is the part that makes me feel ugly when I admit it, I also felt relief. Relief that for once my future had not been fully consumed by a family disaster. Relief that I could listen to the crisis without immediately becoming financially naked. Relief that when I said no, the ground under me still held. Those two feelings lived side by side for months. Guilt and relief, shame and self-preservation. I would speak to my mother about creditor letters and then close the call and sit at my kitchen table staring at a bowl of pears, thinking there is enough in my accounts to take away so much of this pain, and also if I start doing that now, it will never end. The truth came out because Tom is exactly the sort of person who experiences any boundary as an accusation and immediately starts searching for a weakness in it. Last autumn he came to Ghent. Officially, he was there because a friend had mentioned bar management work in Antwerp, and he wanted to explore possibilities. My mother asked whether he could stay with me for 4 nights to save money. I said no at first. Then she sounded tired in a way that made refusal feel like a moral performance rather than a boundary, so I agreed to 3 nights only. Jonas was away in Leuven that week helping his mother after a minor surgery, which meant it was just me and Tomov in the apartment. From the moment he arrived, I regretted it. He noticed everything. The restored floors, the coffee machine I had bought after saving for it, the framed prints, the quality of my winter coat on the hall hook. None of these were luxury items. They were the accumulated signs of a person who had built steadiness slowly and intentionally. But to Tom, they looked like evidence. He asked what my monthly payment on the apartment was. I told him I did not discuss personal finances. He smiled with the kind of false lightness that usually means he has already decided your answer is suspicious. On the second day, I came home early from work because a systems meeting ended ahead of schedule. Tom was sitting at my dining table with a folder open in front of him. I knew instantly what it was. A week earlier, I had been sorting paperwork for a tax declaration and left one drawer in my desk unlocked. Inside were bank summaries, investment statements, mortgage papers, and the closing documents from the company acquisition years earlier. Not a theatrical treasure chest, just organized proof of a life I had spent years keeping partially hidden from my family. He had spread some of it out. I still remember the exact stillness of that moment. My keys in my hand, my coat half off, the room too bright because I had not drawn the curtains that morning. Tom looking at me not with sadness first, not with shock, but with a kind of vindicated hunger. He asked whether this was why I had only sent 5,000 when our parents were trying to keep everything from collapsing. I told him to get out. He stood up slowly, carrying the confidence of someone who thinks moral discovery has made him powerful. He said I had lied to everyone. He said our mother had worked herself sick while I sat on half a fortune. He said our father sold land because I wanted to teach the family a lesson. He said Clara gave things up because I had decided secrecy mattered more than blood. He kept talking as I packed his bag and put his shoes by the door like I was removing a difficult guest from a hotel room. Then he said the worst thing. He said our grandmother Milada would be ashamed of me. That was the moment my anger stopped feeling hot and became something colder and much more precise. I took the copy of Milada's old note from my desk. I keep it with important papers because she once wrote me something after I helped her sort out a pension issue. The line that stayed with me all these years was simple. If you want to know whether help is being received with gratitude or entitlement, say no once and listen carefully. I told Tom that I had done exactly that and listened. He left in a storm of wounded righteousness, but people like him are never satisfied with a private confrontation. Before he reached Brussels, he had already called my mother. By that evening, my phone showed missed calls from both parents and a message from Clara asking what happened. I did not answer until the next morning because I knew that once I did, there would be no putting the structure back. My mother cried first. Not loudly. She has never been loud when most hurt. She asked whether what Tom said was true, whether I had really had enough money for years to protect myself completely while they struggled, whether the apartment was almost paid off, whether my investments were real, whether I had been hiding this while listening to her talk about bills and debt and fatigue. I said yes. There are silences that feel like weather changing. That was one of them. Then she asked how I could do that to them. I told her the truth too quickly. I said, because if I had told you, it would have stopped being mine. The sound she made after that still lives in my head. Not dramatic, just hurt landing without padding. My father called next. His anger was quieter but heavier. He said he had defended me to relatives who thought I had become distant and selfish abroad. He said he felt humiliated that his own daughter had treated him like a potential threat. He said if I felt used, I should have spoken openly instead of lying like an accountant designing emotional loopholes. That line would have been almost impressive if it had not been such a clean accidental description of what I had done. Then came Clara. I had dreaded her call most of all. She did not accuse immediately. She asked if I had really been that financially secure when she postponed the Vienna course. I said yes. She asked if I had really listened to our mother cry over bills, while knowing the full picture was different. I said yes, though not different for them, only for me. She said softly that the money was not even the whole issue. The issue was that I had let her organize her choices around an image of my vulnerability that was no longer true. She said she would have respected boundaries if I had told her. She said she did not know what to do with the fact that I had decided on her behalf that she was part of the risk. That hurt more than anything Tom said because she was the only one speaking from relationship rather than access. For nearly 3 weeks, my family existed around me like a field of static. My mother sent long messages about sacrifice and trust. My father withdrew into clipped practical calls only when absolutely necessary. Thomas spread the story through the wider family with enough dramatic trimming to make himself sound like the accidental revealer of moral truth. Aunt Susanna sent a note about blood being thicker than money, which is a sentence usually delivered by people who want access to one more without having much of the other. Cousin Marek, who had once accepted support from me without ever repaying a cent, wrote that wealth changes people in sad ways. I read those messages and kept thinking the most revealing part was what none of them asked. No one asked why I had felt the need to hide. No one asked what history might have produced that decision. No one asked how many times I had already helped. The public story in the family became that I had deceived them. The private truth, which I still believe is more important, was that I had not felt safe telling them. Eventually, I went to Brno because distance had started to feel like cowardice. I took the train from Ghent to Brussels, then onward through Germany, sitting most of the journey with my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles hurt. When I arrived, the city looked almost offensively normal. Trams running, students smoking near stations, old women carrying flowers, the bakery near my parents' building still selling poppy seed rolls. It is unsettling how ordinary the world remains on days when your family structure is shifting under your feet. At my parents' flat, my mother had cooked far too much food, which is her oldest defense against emotional disaster. My father was at the table already. Tom was there too, despite my asking that he not be. Klau Ra arrived a little later from Pasal, face tense, coat still half open. The room felt crowded with old roles waiting to be reassigned. The conversation began politely and failed almost at once. My father asked why I chose deception instead of honesty. I asked why honesty from me had always been expected mainly when it benefited others. My mother said that was cruel. Tom said I was rewriting the family to excuse greed. Clara asked everyone to slow down. No one really did. So I started naming things. I talked about the envelope from my school years that went to my father's van problem. I talked about the scholarship money that somehow became family support. I talked about Tama's rent, his phone, his failed photography equipment, the course fees he abandoned, the deposit that was supposed to be temporary, the thousand small rescues no one now seemed to remember. I talked about helping with the boiler, the water damage, mother's dental work, legal review for the cafe, quiet support for Clau Ra, where I could manage it without turning it into family theater. I said that every time I became more stable, the family appetite expanded accordingly. I said that I stopped telling the full truth because experience had taught me that in this family, visible capacity becomes moral obligation almost instantly. My mother cried and asked whether she had really been that much of a burden. It was exactly the turn I feared because it transformed a structural conversation into a test of tenderness. If I said no, the real issue vanished. If I said yes, I became monstrous. So I answered carefully. I said she was not a burden. I said the burden was the system we had all participated in, where my ability to manage became a resource others felt entitled to draw on before I had even offered it. My father looked wounded. He said he had never seen me as an account. He had seen me as his daughter. I believe he meant that. I also believe people often tell the truth about their feelings while lying, without realizing it, about the consequences of those feelings. He loved me as his daughter. He also assumed that what I could do should be available to the family in a way no one else's capacity ever was. Then Tom started again about the cafe, the land sale, our mother's overtime, and the fact that I had enough to make those things less painful. He kept speaking as if the existence of my money was in itself proof of my obligation. Finally, I asked him a simple question. If I had given 37,000 then, what would have happened the next time? Would he have stopped thinking of me as the back wall of every bad decision? He called that manipulative, which answered everything. Then Clara spoke. She said she understood why I hid the truth from Tom. She even understood, to a point, why I hid it from our parents. But she did not understand why I hid it from her long after she had shown me, over and over, that she was not looking for someone to subsidize her life. She said the lie had not only changed what she knew, it had changed how she understood our closeness. She had thought we were two sisters navigating the same unstable weather. Now she saw that I had left the storm earlier and watched her continue walking in it without telling her there was shelter nearby. That sentence went straight through me. I told her the truth as cleanly as I could. I said that once I started hiding the real scale of my security, I became afraid of any exception. I did not trust myself to control the flow once the gate opened. I was afraid that if one person knew, the information would spread. I was afraid that if I explained my real position honestly, I would be forced into honest refusals that I was not ready to defend over and over. I said secrecy had become a crude boundary because I did not know how to build a better one. No one spoke for a while after that. It was not a cinematic scene. No one stormed dramatically. No one embraced. My mother carried untouched plates to the sink. My father stared at the table. Tama paced near the window like a man who still thought indignation counted as contribution. Clara sat very still. Then I did something I had spent years avoiding. I gave terms. I said I would help in certain ways and not in others. I said I would fund Clara's Vienna postgraduate course if she still wanted it, not because I owed her silence money, but because I believed in her and because supporting growth is not the same as subsidizing chaos. I said I would pay for a full independent financial review for our parents and for legal cleanup on any remaining cafe fallout, but only if every document was disclosed and no one ever signed another guarantee for Tomev. I said I would not give lump sums to save business ventures. I said I would not become an emergency fund for poor planning. I said I would not discuss the full extent of my assets with the wider family. I said if those conditions made me seem cold, then cold was simply the name they were giving to structure. My father said I sounded like a bank. I said banks at least send the terms in advance. Tama left after that, angry in the dull repetitive way of a person whose usual routes have been blocked. My mother whispered that he was humiliated. I told her humiliation is often just entitlement meeting a locked door. She did not answer. That conversation did not solve everything. What it did was end ambiguity. In the months after, my father reluctantly agreed to the financial review. The report was worse than even I expected. Old debts rolled into newer ones, duplicate fees, insurance arrangements no one had properly checked, penalties paid simply because letters had been avoided too long. My mother looked 10 years older when she read through it. I do not think she had realized how much of the household structure had been maintained by concealment and hopeful language. My father, to his credit, did not try to charm the advisor. Numbers pinned him in a way family never had. I paid for the legal cleanup and some professional restructuring of their debts. It was not cheap, but it was finite and finite matters. I made it clear in writing that this was not ongoing support for Tom or any future venture. My father bristled at the formality. I insisted. Paper is sometimes the only place boundaries survive. Clara eventually accepted the Vienna course. At first she resisted because she did not want to feel like an afterthought corrected by money. We talked for hours, first in Brno, then later in Vienna when I met her after one of her modules. Slowly she understood that my support for her was different from what the rest of the family had been reaching for. I was not financing avoidance. I was investing in someone who had already done the work and only needed room. The distinction mattered to me so much that I probably over-explained it. She smiled once and said I always speak most when I am afraid of being misunderstood. She is right about that. Our relationship is better now than it has ever been, though more honest in a less flattering way. She admits when she wants something instead of pretending she can manage with nothing. I admit when I am uncomfortable instead of hiding behind practical excuses. We are not magically healed sisters from a novel. We are two women from the same house trying to build a connection that is not based on silence, guilt, or competence theater. My mother and I are harder. She still loves me in the old dense way that contains worry, devotion, and disappointment without always separating them clearly. Sometimes on the phone she slips into old habits and starts narrating a financial problem in a tone that gently invites rescue. When that happens, I stop her and ask whether she is informing me or asking me for something. The first few times I did that, she sounded hurt. Now she just sounds tired, which, strangely, is progress. Tired people are closer to the truth than performative martyrs. My father has changed the least outwardly, but perhaps the most internally. He no longer talks about business ideas with the same floating confidence. He checks documents. He asks me to explain terms he once would have brushed aside to preserve his self-image. He still does not fully forgive the lie. I can see that. But he has also begun to recognize, however reluctantly, that the lie did not emerge in a vacuum. It emerged in the exact climate he helped create. Tom barely speaks to me now unless there is an audience, in which case he can still become theatrical about betrayal and family values. Last I heard, he was helping organize live music nights in Brno and describing himself online as a cultural entrepreneur. I no longer feel the need to correct him. Some people build identity out of spin because facing the plain version of themselves would require more work than performance. I do not hate him. I think he is what happens when a family keeps converting consequences into temporary inconveniences. As for me, I still do not know whether I was right. I know I lied. I know the lie protected me. I know the lie also hurt people who were not equally guilty. I know that if I had told the full truth early, my family would not have responded with respectful distance and mature boundaries. I know that because they did not even do that after finding out. Sometimes I sit in my apartment in Ghent after work with the tram sounds below the window and rain on the glass, and I think about the years when I believed adulthood would finally free me from the emotional arithmetic of my childhood. It did not. It only made the arithmetic larger. The sums changed, the currencies changed, the country changed, but the old equation remained for a long time. If Elaka can carry more, Elitka should carry more. The real break in my life was not earning money. It was deciding imperfectly and too late that my ability to carry does not automatically create everyone else's right to climb on. I still keep one note from my grandmother Malada in my desk. The paper has softened from being unfolded too many times. If you want to know whether help is being received with gratitude or entitlement, say no once and listen carefully. I said no. Then I listened. That is how I learned that some of the outrage in my family was not about my dishonesty. It was about interrupted access, about discovering that the quiet, dependable daughter they had always treated as a reserve system had built a room with a locked door. Maybe I should have built that door openly. Maybe lying made me smaller than I wanted to be. Maybe honesty would have been cleaner. But I also know this. Every person now condemning the lie is someone who benefited for years from a family culture where my effort was assumed, my restraint was expected, and my future was treated as negotiable if the present emergency sounded urgent enough. So, yes, I lied about how much money I have. And the worst part is that I still think if I had told the truth earlier, I would have lost far more than money.